Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening, startling the other 4 who were still caught in their dilemma. He picked up another ordinary transponder snail from the coffee table and personally issued an order to Chief of Staff Alexander Watson in front of everyone. Namely, to have the Air Force and Cypher Paul secretly escort all the pure gold to Noah's Ark on the moon. Over at the command department, Steelbone Kong, who also served as Fleet Admiral of the Air Force, received Alexander Watson's message. He immediately issued an order to Kizaru Borsellino, who was already an Air Force Admiral. As for Azure Dragon Kaido, who was also an Air Force Admiral, he didn't even consider it. Sometimes, this issue of background is truly deeply ingrained. Meanwhile, back in the room of authority, as St. Topman Warcurry placed the handset back on the transponder snail's back, the crisp snap sound instantly eased the suffocatingly oppressive atmosphere. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn, St. Marcus Mars, St. Shepherd Jupiter, and St. Jaga Ursha Saturn all breathed a sigh of relief almost simultaneously. Believe in Lord Demu, and believe in our own value. After speaking, St. Topman Warcurry stand up and left first, but no one noticed that the hand hidden in his sleeve was actually trembling slightly. On the moon, Im watched the process through Starfate, which made the corners of his mouth curl up in pleasure. As expected of the 5 elders, there's really no need to worry about their wisdom. He had also considered what he should do with these people if the 5 elders tried to play dirty with him for the pure gold. After thinking for a few minutes, he ultimately decided to eliminate them and replace them with a new batch. After all, no matter what, this would be considered an act of betrayal. If they couldn't even resist the temptation of pure gold, wouldn't they backstab him in an instant when faced with the various stronger temptations of the future multiverse? But now, these 5 elders had given him a satisfactory answer. Especially St. Topman Warcurry, he was definitely a perfect candidate. However, how to use these more than 500 tons of pure gold is truly a big problem. Im frowned when he thought of this problem, because this matter was indeed very tricky. One must know that just 1 gram of this stuff can grant the person immortality. What kind of concept is 500 tons? First, one thing must be clear, the pure gold definitely cannot be allowed to spread widely. Even if it is to be distributed, there must be higher restrictions and high monitoring. As for keeping it a secret, they must try their best, but when capturing the lanternfish, there were so many Marines present that complete secrecy was impossible. Fortunately, they were all soldiers from headquarters. 1 day later, Kizaru led 5 flying warships to the moon and delivered an enormous sphere sealed with steel to the front deck of Noah's Ark. Yo, what a huge golden belfry! Kizaru paid no attention to the Air Force soldiers who were breathlessly dragging the nearly 600-ton steel sphere, instead leisurely observing the environment of Noah's Ark. When he saw the golden belfry towering in the distance, he couldn't help but marvel openly, looking no different from a tourist sightseeing. But when Guakulkan coiled out from the building and looked down from the golden belfry's rooftop, it added a touch of surprise to Kizaru's face. Such a big snake, is it a sea king? How scary! Crackling, just then, a blue lightning bolt descended from the sky. The thunderous loud noise startled Kizaru, who was admiring Orochi and the golden bell. He turned his head in surprise to look. He saw a young man appear from the electric flash, with white influence on his back, wearing a white headscarf, bare-chested, and with earlobes reaching his chest. However, the young man's face was full of pride and confidence, and his gaze seemed to look down on everyone. Moreover, his pair of wings were much larger than those of ordinary Sky Islanders. Kizaru estimated they were about the same size as Vice Admiral King's black wings. By order of Lord Saint Nerona, I have come to receive the items you have delivered. A Logia user? Kizaru was even more surprised. Seeing that the other party's ability was lightning, he recalled the Devil Fruit Encyclopedia and immediately knew Enel's specific ability. The Logia system Rumble Fruit. At this moment, Enel actively walked over, looked at Kizaru, and chuckled. You must be the current Air Force Admiral, Kizaru? That's right, Kizaru replied casually with a crooked mouth, but then heard Enel say. My name is Enel. Please take care of me in the future, Because I will be the future Air Force Admiral, with the epithet Thunder Dragon. Is that so? That's truly remarkable. But you don't seem to be an adult yet, little one, Kizaru teased. Enel curled his lip and smiled. That's why I said future, old man. One flash, one thunder. Although the two had just met today and their ages were quite different, there was a strange sense of competition between them. Even someone like Kizaru couldn't help but exchange a few words with Enel. About 10 minutes later, Im saw the large steel sphere, nearly 3 meters in diameter, in the top floor hall. Without seeing any movement from him on the throne, the surface of the steel sphere below automatically split open to the left and right. Buzzing, in an instant, incredibly dazzling golden light swept through the entire space like a surging wave. Fortunately, there were no windows here, preventing the radiance from shining outside. But Im, who was illuminated by the golden light, clearly felt uncomfortable. It seems this pure gold is not only useless to me, but also harmful. Im thought to himself as he examined the pure gold sphere whose radiance was beginning to subside. His body had received the Apop Fruit's ultimate surgery 900 years ago and obtained the ability of eternal life. However, this kind of eternal life is different from the eternal life produced by pure gold. Pure gold's light produces an effect that causes the growth of all things to slow down extremely. Therefore, whether it's injuries, poisoning, or other diseases, they will all become very, very slow. This will also directly result in the body being unable to continue improving through training. In other words, for people who want to continue becoming stronger, it is actually considered a great poison. The eternal life surgery, on the other hand, is eternal life in terms of lifespan. It doesn't have this side effect of causing the body to become stagnant, and naturally, it also doesn't have the effect of slowing down injuries or toxicity. Both can be said to have their own advantages and disadvantages. For him, if he wasn't considering further enhancement of his physical ability, then it could be considered a good thing. Unfortunately, that's impossible. The reserves of hockey are directly related to the strength of one's physical ability, so he will definitely have to find a way to break through the limit of physical ability in the future. Therefore, for him, pure gold does more harm than good. However, when encountering a strong enemy, he could use pure gold to give his body a passive extreme slowing buff. Speaking of the Apop Fruit's eternal life, Im thought of a legend that made one's heart pound. That is, once a second person receives the eternal life surgery, then the previous eternal life user will lose their eternal life. Because it is only effective for one person at a time. Chapter 424, The World's Great Development Period. 2 days later, Khan the Iron Fist of the Command Department received a small white box personally delivered by Stussy. When he gently opened the lid, he found a diamond ring inside. The diamond was estimated to be 10 carats, or 1 gram in size. At this moment, Khan's mood was incredibly excited. His eyes even turned slightly red. Because he knew that although it looked like a diamond, it actually contained a small piece of pure gold. Although the volume wasn't large, it was enough to ensure that his body would no longer continue to age with time. As for the issue of strength stagnating, why care when compared to life? Khan had long stopped thinking about making further progress. Because his age was already too great, and he simply didn't have any extra potential. In fact, Khan hadn't expected the higher-ups to give him pure gold. But now that it was on his finger, it made him completely devoted to the world government. What reward could be more precious than this eternal life? However, the higher-ups also made it clear to him. He couldn't stay in the position of Command Department Minister forever. In the future, he would definitely have to yield it to those below him. And at that time, he would move behind the scenes. That is, he would enter the Supreme Executive Committee and become one of the world government's foundation. As for the pure gold ring, as long as he didn't leave the world government, he could keep it. Of course, the world government reserved the authority to take it back at any time. In the days that followed, time passed day by day on the world. The 5 elders and Khan the Iron Fist invested more enthusiasm into their respective work. If before they had merely handled and waited passively with a normal mindset, now they actively increased the supervision of the progress of various projects. Although this made things tough for the officials of various sizes in the major research institutes and departments, it did indeed increase the world government's efficiency by 10 or 20%. The 200,000 construction workers introduced from the Demon Slayer world had been assigned to the construction sites of major projects. First was the railway construction project encircling the Red Line. Then there were the RL0005 Spring Area, RL0006 Summer Area, RL0007 Autumn Area, and RL0008 Winter Area. These 4 connected zones were designated as the Academy City District. There was also the zone of RL15558, which would be the camp for Stargate number 0003, as well as the Sea Great Bridge project in the East Blue connecting all medium and large islands. After all, Relying on the hundreds of thousands of prisoners in Impel Down, no one knew how many years it would take to complete. In the five elders' minds, this bridge needed at least 1 million laborers stationed there permanently. After that, the construction of the Air Force headquarters on Sky Island also required more workers, as did the construction of power generation stations in various places, especially the power generation station on Rajan Island, which was a key project. The world government's future target was to provide electric power to every island with a town. Therefore, tidal power generation, geothermal power generation, wind power generation, and even solar power generation, etc., were all undergoing technological experiments and development at the Academy of Science. There was also the court for the myriad world's top 100 competition which would be used next year. Not only that, the super large island-eating lanternfish, under IM's secret interference, was not killed or released. Instead, Hazami was sent to the Marines with a dango to control it. Then, Crocus of the Medical Academy, in conjunction with the Academy of Science and the Construction Department, was tasked with renovating the lanternfish's body and the 3 islands into a navy base that could be used for military purposes. It should be known that this lanternfish was not only astonishingly large but could also swim freely in the deep sea 10,000 meters below. What was this? The best biological submarine. It even came with its own lighting function, so this project also required a large number of workers. After calculating everything, the administrative department suddenly discovered that 200,000 Demon Slayer laborers were not enough, so they could only request instructions from the higher-ups layer by layer. Ultimately, St. Topman Warcurry ordered the introduction of another 500,000 laborers and all famous architects from the Demon Slayer world. At the same time, due to Stella's live interview with Mitsuri Kanraji and others on the Sabati archipelago, as well as the Yubu Yashiki family on Wano Island, the citizens in various places across the world gained a better understanding of the Demon Slayer core. Naturally, they were no longer so unfamiliar with the Demon Slayer world. Gradually, when people discussed another world, it was like discussing a kingdom in another sea area, and their thought and mindset began to change. Unfortunately, the people of the Kabinarai world were not so easy to interview. Nima Amatori was in the staff department, Dr. Shawai was in the Biochemical Research Institute, Ikama was in the Weapons Research Institute of the Academy of Science, Mekko was in Cypherpol, and Hazami was on the Backups, which was already an Air Force base. It could be said that although everyone's position was not very high, they were all in highly confidential departments. At this time, Tesoro, who was already the vice warden of the propaganda department's media agency, suddenly had a brilliant idea and suggested to the minister that the stories of the Demon Slayer Corps and the Kabinarai world be compiled into manga and sold. This would not only increase a certain amount of income but also allow the people of the world to accept and familiarize themselves with the existence of other worlds faster. Tesoro's idea received a certain degree of importance. After several committee meetings within the propaganda department, it was decided to give it a try and establish a manga division under the media agency to produce the 2 manga series tentatively titled Demon Slayer, Kimetsunoya and Kabinarai of the Iron Fortress. For this purpose, the media agency began dispatching staff officers to various affiliated countries to inquire about people skilled in drawing and those who had drawn comic strips. However, these matters were considered secondary work projects for the world government. In comparison, solving the transportation problem at Reverse Mountain clearly needed to be resolved as quickly as possible. How could the 5 elders be anything but smart? They naturally realized that in the future, the various comings and goings between the Grand Line and the 4 Seas would definitely become more frequent. Relying solely on the one entrance and exit at Reverse Mountain was absolutely insufficient. Therefore, various relevant departments began gathering professionals and officials at all levels to research the world's transportation problem, discovering there were only 2 methods. One was to open up the comm belt on both sides, which was the best method, but how to deal with the Sea Kings was a big problem. Someone mentioned that the sea train being developed in Water 7 was said to have the effect of repelling Sea Kings, so it could be tried. But no one knew when the sea train would be completed, and this kind of thing couldn't be sped up simply by piling on manpower and resources. Then there was only the second method, which was to travel by sky. But traveling by sky, the biggest problem was the Grand Line's excessively chaotic magnetic field and extremely abnormal extreme weather, unless one passed through above 7,000 meters. What could fly above 7,000 meters, carry a large amount of people and goods, and perform long-duration flights? Airships. It was finally discovered that by having the Academy of Science renovate the Hans Tiger airships from the Demon Slayer world, and then preparing some fixed landing and takeoff sites, the sky above 7,000 meters could be completely transformed into the world's high-speed skyway, allowing everyone to travel freely between the major seas. No more discussion needed. Now that there was a method, it was time to get busy. The construction department searched for places with relatively stable climate to serve as airship bases for various sections of the Grand Line, while the Academy of Science began working on researching airships. The Industrial Division sent people to the Han's Tiger country in the Demon Slayer world to collect their existing airships and all relevant manufacturing files. In short, the entire world, from top to bottom, entered a period of vigorous development. Various manpower and natural resources from the Demon Slayer world and Kabaneri world, under the command of the Other World Strategy Committee, were continuously transported to the Sea Star mainland day and night through the Stargates. Chapter 425, The Third Stargate Opened? Time flies, years pass like shuttling threads, time flows like quicksand through everyone's fingers, becoming the past. The world once again welcomed a new year. It was now 000001 on January 1st, Marine Calendar 1500. This marked the moment the world entered the 16th century. It was also the 4th year since Sim transmigrated. Indeed, many things happened last year, and many aspects of the world underwent numerous changes. For example, Wano country became Wano Island. This place had become the world government's largest source of sea stone and alcohol iron ore, as well as a manufacturing hub for various sharp swords and niche iron blades. It's worth mentioning that the world government had previously specifically sent Kizaru over to turn Udon into a sleepless land. Then, they transported a large amount of gorilla sand iron ore and scarlet ore from the Demon Slayer world and piled it onto a selected large mountain. They even sent several Tontata tribe members from the agricultural college to transplant some blue spider lilies at the foot of the mountain. The purpose was to replicate a sun mountain here. However, it was clear that this would require years of geological infiltration and assimilation. Fortunately, the mineral reserves on the Sun Mountain side were sufficient for the current stage. Inside the flower capital, although it was the deep of night, large patches of pink and white cherry blossoms could still be seen illuminated by the moonlight, accompanied by the gentle evening breeze, dancing under the starry sky, drifting through the ancient-style streets and alleys lit by lanterns. However, above the bright moon disk, several black shadows could occasionally be seen flying past, adding a touch of science fiction to the entire atmosphere. A manor covering a large area, sufficiently secluded, composed of 9 large blue-tiled houses and 5 gate walls, sat quietly in the eastern zone on the outskirts of the city. This was the new clan land the world government had given to the Yubuyashiki family and the Jing family. No. Suddenly, a cry that was clearly filled with panic, yet sounded so gentle and even pleasant to the ear, abruptly woke Amon, who was sleeping beside him. "What's wrong, Kageya?" Amon, with her snow-white hair, sat up, first lit the bedside lamp, and then looked at her husband in confusion, only to find him covered in cold sweat. "Oh. It's nothing, I think I had a nightmare," Kageya Yubuyashiki said softly, covering his face with his right palm. This former master of the Demon Slayer Corps had undergone tremendous changes. His face, which was originally full of twisted, bumpy pale purple scars and dull, blind white pupils, had recovered to a fair, rosy, and healthy complexion with sparkling eyes. This was the merit of the Medical Academy. However, it also seemed to have some connection with the Biochemical Research Institute. Initially, the Medical Academy only cured his eyes and face, but his physique, which was so weak that even a cough could cause a bone fracture and spitting blood, could not be solved by conventional medical treatment. This seemed to be a congenital lack of life force. If not for the marriage alliance with the Jing family, whose life force far exceeded that of ordinary people in the Demon Slayer world, the Yubuyashiki boys would basically not have been able to live to adulthood. For this reason, after trying various medical treatment means, Kira, Nakan, Shinobukacho, Damayo, and others could only consider finding an animal system devil fruit to try and supplement his life force. To be honest, this was a reluctant choice made out of necessity for these highly skilled doctors. But no matter what, saving people was the top priority. Just at this moment, Kageya Yubuyashiki's body suddenly began to improve. His appetite increased, his physique got better and better, and his originally weak, pale skin color also became rosy. Not only him, but even his son, Yubuyashiki Kiriya, showed this change. At first, Kira and the others were completely baffled. No one knew why this was happening. They even wondered if the medicine they had taken before had started to take effect. But that wasn't right, Yubuyashiki Kiriya hadn't taken any. Finally, they heard that Mizen Kibatsuji at the Biochemical Research Institute had consumed the blue spider lily and transformed from the demon progenitor into a perfect being. Comparing the time between the two sides, they immediately discovered that the Yubuyashiki father and son had started recovering their normal physique from that day onwards. This forced everyone to believe in the so-called curse legend. Precisely because of this, Amon had felt confused before. Her husband had already recovered his health, so why would he still be woken up by pain? Just a nightmare? You really scared me, I thought you were. Amon gently held Kaguya's arm, looking at him worriedly. But I always feel like this dream is more than just a dream. Kaguya Yubuyashiki said softly, frowning. It's very clear, and the scene in the dream is very much like a future screen feed, but I've never had future sight in my sleep before, so I'm not very sure. Every successive family head of the Yubuyashiki family possessed a very mysterious special ability. They could actively see things that would happen within the next year. They also used this to do business and earn a large amount of funding for the Demon Slayer Corps, and relied on it to help the Demon Slayer Corps avoid several devastating disasters. However, each use would consume lifespan, coupled with their fragile body due to the curse, so they could only use it once or twice in their lifetime. But something like passively receiving future information, as happened today, was truly unprecedented. Amon asked curiously. So what did you see? I saw a pitch-black army unit entering an arid world through a stargate. Seinmai was among them. Then they were bombarded by countless cannon fire, and after that, we attended Seinmai's funeral. Yubuyashiki narrated the scene from his dream with a grim expression. Although he didn't have much affection for the army, he was very concerned about Seinmai Shinazugawa, the Wind Hashira. To him, every single person in the Demon Slayer Corps was his child. Is that so? Amon fell into thought. If her husband's dream was truly about the future, it meant that when the world government invaded other worlds, they were met with a prepared counterattack. There was too much to ponder in this. Then what do you plan to do? What else can I do? To save Seinmai, there seems to be no other way. Kaguya Yubuyashiki sighed deeply. His future sight ability seemed to have changed somewhat as his body recovered. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Kaguya Yubuyashiki, accompanied by his wife, arrived at the former Orachi Castle. Now, this place had been renamed Celestial Dragon City, which was a traveling palace specifically prepared for the Celestial Dragons. Saint Mihawk resided within it. The tower on the right side served as the world government's administration branch, housing officials from various departments responsible for overseeing the numerous affairs of Wano Island. On the left side, a new 10-story wooden building had also been constructed, serving as the headquarters of the Sword Pavilion. Jian was currently there, collecting and organizing various ancient swordsmanship techniques with many samurai, while also sparring with each other and occasionally providing guidance to children like Danjiro, Inuzuka, and Zenitsu Agatsuma. 20 minutes later, Kaguya Yubuyashiki knelt on the tatami and explained everything to Saint Mihawk, who was seated in the upper position. The latter, upon hearing it, also understood the importance of the matter. After sincerely thanking the former, he immediately took out the transponder snail exclusive to the 7 warlords of the sea and reported the matter Kaguya Yubuyashiki had spoken of to him. After listening, suppressed the surprise in his heart and instructed Mihawk to relay it to the 5 elders. After ending the call, he couldn't help but feel a bit unsettled. It was truly quite strange. What's the situation? Are you saying the army unit was ambushed as soon as the 3rd Stargate opened? Chapter 426, Mysterious, Apprehensive, Speculation. If Imu felt surprised, the 5 elders felt it was even more unimaginable. They even had Cypher Paul headquarters send people to Wano Island to directly communicate with Kaguya Yubuyashiki. During this process, they also had several interrogation experts observe his tone, expression, and gaze as he spoke. Adding to this, Imu had previously confirmed that the Yubuyashiki family indeed possessed the ability of future sight. Ultimately, the higher-ups of the world government had to take Kaguya's prophecy seriously. It also caused them to suspend their plan to open the 3rd Stargate on January 10th. According to our operation steps, we would definitely first dispatch several groups of Cypher Paul investigators squads, and only then would we mobilize the army units to enter the Stargate. This indicates that the preceding investigators squads must have first been attacked, and failed to bring back any useful intelligence, which is why the subsequent large troops were ambushed. Inside the Room of Authority, Saint Shepherd Jupiter made a simple deduction based on the known information. There are too many strange questions here. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn leaned back on the comfortable sofa, his expression serious, and took over the conversation, saying, firstly, how did the other side know about the Stargate, and even determine its position? Secondly, I remember the Cypher Paul investigators are elites, right? And they should all be carrying visual Den Mushi. How did they manage to completely block intelligence feedback? Finally, the prophecy mentioned that a large amount of cannon fire attacked the army, which means the other side had prepared artillery emplacements near the Stargate in advance. As his voice fell, the room fell into silence, everyone contemplating the possibilities. Honestly, this was truly the first time they had encountered such a tricky situation. Should they send people in to check now? Similarly, Imu also had no good solution. After all, He first needed some iconic things to determine what world was on the other side of the Stargate, and then recall various information about that world. This old man believes that no matter what, Cypherpol must send people in. Even if everyone dies, as long as they can send back valuable intelligence, it's enough. Saint Topman Warcurry said coldly with a blank expression. Saint Shepherd Jupiter also nodded in agreement. What I'm worried about now is that the world we've encountered this time might be an extremely powerful civilization, so it's better to be careful. If the other side manages to break into our homeland through the Stargate, the consequences would be unimaginable. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn reminded, leaning on his cane, his face full of fear. Indeed. Saint Marcus Mars, standing nearby, strongly agreed with his words. We cannot relax our vigilance just because the previous two worlds were weak. Lord Imu warned us before that the cosmic star sea is the same as the Grand Line. Each star can be seen as an island. The level of civilization development varies greatly in each world. Even with a 1 in 10,000 chance, there must be many worlds that we cannot resist. Saint Topman Warcurry asked in a deep voice. So, it's highly likely that we've encountered such a world this time, right? Exactly. Saint Marcus Mars looked at him solemnly. Therefore, whether or not to open this third Stargate, this old man thinks we need to reconsider. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn suggested with a frown. Open it, it must be opened. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn suddenly snorted coldly, saying with anger. The Stargate is right before us, yet we don't dare to open it just because we encountered one ambush. When did we become so cowardly? You. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn's face instantly darkened, but Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn didn't even look at him, continuing to state his opinion. We need to prepare enough high-level combatants, military strength, and defensive works in the third Stargate camp in advance, in case the enemy's troops break through. Once everything is ready, we will request Lord Imut to open the Stargate. Saint Topman Warcurry asked. Then how many high-level combatants do you think we need to mobilize, and how much military strength should we prepare? Mobilize the Army's admirals and candidate admirals, including Bullet stationed in the Kabinrai world and Crocodile in the Demon Slayer world. Then have the Air Force's Kizaru, Kaido, Marco, King, and 20 flying warships set up defense in the high altitude. As for military strength, Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn hesitated for a moment, then said. First mobilize 300,000 army soldiers, and arrange 2,000 heavy howitzers to aim at the Stargate. Alright, let's do that. This old man will have the construction department send Kaika over to build the defensive works as quickly as possible. We must ensure that Zone RL 1558 can be used as the first battlefield at any time. Saint Topman Warcurry immediately picked up the transponder snail on the coffee table and called the Dean of the Political Affairs Department. Speaking of which, Pika and Teach had already completed the main buildings of the Sky Island headquarters Elbai, such as the port, plaza, fortress, cafeteria, and dormitory buildings. However, it would still require 2 to 3 months of renovation time for the Air Force to officially move in. During this period, the place with the biggest changes in the world was probably transportation. After all, large-scale projects like Academy City, Red Earth Railway, and East Sea Bridge would still take a long time no matter what. First, airships. In the 7,000-meter high altitude of the Grand Line, many large airships could already be seen traveling back and forth. These were super airships modified by the Academy of Science. Firstly, compared to the Hans Tiger airship from the Demon Slayer world, which was over 200 meters long, these could be called behemoths. Because these airships in the world were a full 1,000 meters long, with a diameter of over 100 meters, at an overall height roughly equivalent to a 40-story tall building. However, this also meant their gas bags required a much larger amount of helium, more powerful electric engines, and safer gas bag materials. These problems were solved with the support of the Float Fruit's superpower, the electric engine invented by Vegapunk, and the Kabinrai heart membrane. Honestly, even if an airship was damaged, the Float Fruit's ability could ensure it wouldn't plummet rapidly. This was the best safety guarantee. Of course, such large airships would definitely have larger cabin space and load capacity. Each voyage could carry 400 people. But their speed wasn't very fast, and under Imu's secret interference, the number manufactured wasn't very large either, only 8 in total. After all, Imu believed airships would eventually be phased out, they were just for temporary use now. This directly led to the airship ticket prices being quite high, only affordable for some nobility or wealthy powerhouses. For the majority of citizens, the best option was to take civilian passenger ships from the Flamingo Shipping Company. These passenger ships were equipped with Seastone devices distributed by the world government, and each ship had several experts capable of dealing with sea kings for escort, ensuring the passenger ships could travel relatively safely between the Calm Belt and the 4 seas. And although they also charged a fee, The price was much more affordable. In the past, there was too little sea stone, only enough for internal use by marine warships. Others had to be purchased at high prices from the black market. Now it's different. This directly resulted in the four seas becoming increasingly lively. Even the East Blue, widely recognized as the weakest, now frequently saw relatively well-known sword masters or gunmen moving around. What were they doing? Well, before the Myriad World's Top 100 competition began, they were working as bounty hunters to earn a small fortune. Instantly, facing a large group of experts from the Grand Line, many of whom possessed devil fruits or even hockey, the pirates, gangs, and local bosses of the four seas, these lower realms, suffered terribly. Imu saw these changes in the lower realms, but didn't pay too much attention. He was now interested in Kageya Yubuyashiki's prophecy ability because of this third Stargate. Although he knew about the Yubuyashiki family's ability before, he thought that since they had moved to the world, this ability might have become ineffective. Moreover, their bodies were no longer affected by the curse later, making it even more likely they had lost this ability. But now it seemed they hadn't lost it, instead, it had become even stronger? They could even predict another world that hadn't even opened a Stargate yet. Imu calmly looked down at Kageya Yubuyashiki on Wano Island through Starfate. But no matter how I look at it, it seems too far-fetched. The Yubuyashiki's future sight ability, no matter how strong it becomes, shouldn't be like this. Or is the key in the principle and medium of his future sight? Chapter 427, The Essence and Principle of Future Sight from Observation Hockey. Future sight is a superpower widely present in various fantasy worlds. However, the methods and mediums for activating it differ, leading to variations in how the ability manifests. Lord Imu naturally also possesses the ability of future sight, which comes from observation hockey. Furthermore, compared to others who can only see 2 or 3 seconds into the future, he could see up to 8 seconds into the future before breaking through his limit. And now, after a simple test, it's confirmed that he has broken the 10-second barrier and can see up to 11 seconds into the future. However, regarding this type of future sight from observation hockey, based on his mastery of hockey, he can say with certainty that it is not a time-type ability. The essence of observation hockey is the perception of mental power. By strongly sensing the strength of various ores around, one can sense enemies outside their line of sight or predict the opponent's next move. And higher-level future sight is actually also derived from perception. It's just that it perceives more things, and more complex things. In other words, it collects all nearby information, including oneself, the opponent, and the environment, and then integrates and calculates this information in the mind through mental power, finally producing a brief future screen feed. That's right. What is called future sight in observation hockey is actually perception with an added calculation. This is also why future Charlotte Katakuri and Kaido must maintain calmness to successfully use the core principle of future sight. Hot-headed anger or surging impulses will severely affect the efficiency of absorbing external information and performing ultra-high-speed calculation. In comparison, the Yubuyashiki family's future sight is the true time type, although it is said to require a certain lifespan cost. But Lord Imu still doesn't believe that their ability can directly predict the future of the world on the other side of a Stargate that hasn't been opened yet. For this reason, he repeatedly watched a video recording of Cypher Paul's conversation with Kageya Yubuyashiki several times and found that the latter frequently mentioned Seinmai Shinazugawa. Logically, since they are both from the same world, their relationship is naturally very close, and seeing the other person die in the future would certainly make them very anxious. But Lord Imu suspects that the medium for Kageya Yubuyashiki's prediction ability is Seinmai Shinazugawa, or perhaps even every Demon Slayer Corps member. In other words, if Seinmai Shinazugawa was not at Army headquarters, and did not join the first batch of Vanguard troops in the future, then it would be impossible for him to dream of these screen feeds. Then the world government would naturally suffer the greatest casualties since the Stargate was opened, incurring heavy losses. To be honest, Lord Imu actually has no evidence. But this isn't important, he never needs evidence to do things. So he directly gave an order to the 5 elders, telling them to inspect more suitable former Demon Slayer Corps members and transfer them to Army headquarters. In addition, Cypher Paul, the Marines, and the Air Force should also add some. Finally, Kageya Yubuyashiki's son, Yubuyashiki Kiriya, should also be cultivated. At the same time, the Biochemical Research Institute should investigate what exactly the lifespan they consume is. If it is life force, then find a way to restore it for them. If necessary, even animal system devil fruits can be provided at any time. Time-type future sight, which can also be actively controlled, is absolutely a strategic level treasure for a civilization. Speaking of which, Arlong's sister seems to have a similar ability. Lord Imu's thoughts stirred, and the footage in Starfate quickly shifted to Fishman Island. A moment later, he found Shirley, who was just 7 years old. A young mermaid lily of the great blue sharkfish species, with long black hair. According to the canon introduction, she will awaken a mysterious divination ability in the future, using a crystal ball as a medium to see screen feeds of future events, with 100% accuracy, meaning it's a future that will definitely happen. The drawback is that she cannot know the exact future time when the event will occur. Now there's a question, should he let her grow naturally, or should he send her to Yubuyashiki to receive early understanding of future sight? As for whether Yubuyashiki has the ability to cultivate her, that's unknown, but they have mastered future sight for 1,000 years, so they must have accumulated insights and experience, right? Still, send her over and see if they can spark something new. Her age is just right, and while we're at it, have Yubuyashiki send those quadruplet sisters over. Lord Imu had previously wanted the Yubuyashiki quadruplet sisters to be his maids. Later, somehow, he forgot. Now that he remembers, he might as well handle it together. He immediately issued another order to the 5 elders. So, the world on the other side of this third Stargate most likely also has a means of future sight. It's just unknown if it's a person or some kind of technology, and it seems stronger than the Yubuyashiki family. Lord Imu's thoughts at this time were similar to the 5 elders. He felt that the other world encountered this time might be a very strong civilization. On the other side, after receiving Lord Imu's order, Saint Topman Warkuri first sent administrative officials to Wano Island and Fishman Island. Then Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn and Saint Shepherd Jupiter had people send over the files on several former Demon Slayer Corps Hashira. Previously, they didn't care about these other world swordsmen whose strength was at most headquarters colonel level. But now that Lord Imu said these people are likely the medium for the Yubuyashiki family's future sight in the Sea Star world, their value is completely different. In the future, no matter what important operations there are, they can be completely arranged to participate, and then the Yubuyashiki family can be asked if they saw anything. But this made Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn, who was nearby, uncomfortable. Because most of the Hashira are currently in the Ministry of Police Affairs, which is under the judiciary. Isn't this essentially cutting meat from his own influence? So he couldn't help but open his mouth to remind them, no matter what, the Ministry of Police Affairs must have at least 3 Hashira. Let's see about that. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn glanced at him expressionlessly, then looked at the virtual screen projected into the air by the visual Den Mushi. Let's divide them according to their breathing style types. This old man definitely needs people more suitable for combat. So, the Flame Hashira father and son, Stone Hashira Jamai Haimjima, and the former Thunder Hashira Jigoro Kawajima and Sakanji Yorakadaki, along with Chitamiaka, these 2 Water Hashira, will belong to the military. He was thinking of giving the Water Hashira to Marine headquarters, so that water breathing would become the basic training content for the Marines in the future. Then the Thunder Hashira would go to Air Force headquarters, and Flame, Wind, and Stone would go to Army headquarters. However, while Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn's idea was quite good, Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn and Saint Shepherd Jupiter on this side couldn't help but twitch their mouths after hearing it. Listen, is that even reasonable? Good grief, the military is taking them all, huh? Our Cypher Paul also heavily relies on combat ability, but we need people suitable for assassination. So, Serpent Hashira Obanayaguro, Love Hashira Mitsuri Kanraji, and Mist Hashira Muchero Takido will belong to us. Oh, right, Shinobukacho's insect-breathing style and Kanao Tsuyuri's flower-breathing are also good. Saint Shepherd Jupiter stabbed Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn in the chest with another blade, making the latter's expression turn as black as could be in pain. So, what's left now? Nothing. The remaining sound-breathing users already belong to Seninja village. Rengoku father and son, you can only choose one. Same for Sakanji Yorakadaki and Jitamiaka. Also, can you guys please seriously look at their files? It's written there that they don't kill people. Insect breathing is one thing, but how is flower breathing suitable for Cypher Paul? Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn unleashed his full firepower, retorting fiercely against the 2 of them, especially regarding the issue of not killing people. It's simply impossible for them to serve the military and CP. Whether they kill or not isn't important. What's important is having them. It's perfectly fine to purely use them as early warning tools. Moreover, they can completely teach their breathing style to others. Isn't that what your Ministry of Police Affairs is doing? Saint Shepherd Jupiter said with a half-smile, half-not expression. Chapter 428, Sudden Casualties. Ultimately, the 5 elders reached a consensus on the distribution of the breathing styles. The planning was mainly based on the characteristics of the breathing styles, though these weren't rigid rules. It wasn't a rigid rule that if the army cultivated the flame breathing style, other departments couldn't. Instead, the primary breathing style for cultivation was determined based on each department's needs. For example, Thunder breathing, which produces excessive noise, is definitely not suitable for cipher Paul. Due to its overly lethal nature, it's also not suitable for use by the police. Therefore, following St. Jaga Ursha Saturn's idea, it was decided to assign it to the military's grassroots level for cultivation. Strictly speaking, any breathing style is suitable for use by the Army, Marines, or Air Force, depending entirely on the individual's talent and compatibility. However, relatively speaking, the attributes of the water breathing method are indeed more suitable for the Marines who constantly fight on water. Thunder breathing and wind breathing are better for the Air Force, and flame breathing and stone breathing for the Army. Breathing styles are inherently directly linked to mental power. To improve their realm as much as possible, a more suitable disposition and cultivation environment are definitely needed. As for the Ministry of Police Affairs, whose goal is to prioritize capture alive as much as possible, wind breathing and thunder breathing are not suitable. There's also Tenjin Yuzui's sound breathing. Recently, the Sea Ninja Village discovered that based on the world government's latest requirements for their combat style, this breathing style is simply not suitable for Sea Ninja use. Because its commotion is too great. Possibly because it's a branch of thunder breathing, every time the blade is swung, it produces a sound similar to a sonic boom. This is not ninja-like at all. In desperation, the current first-generation Sea Shadow, Fukurikaju, had no choice but to apply to Mihawk for instructors who knew serpent breathing and insect breathing. This also left Tenjin Yuzui speechless. He is currently trying to find a way to improve sound breathing, to see if he can suppress the sound while retaining the speed and frequency of drawing the blade. 2 days later, Paika, who was already a senior architect in the construction department, led a construction team of 3,000 people to the RL-1558 zone where the number 3 Stargate camp is located. The climate here was originally autumn, but because all the trees and vegetation in the entire zone had been cleared, apart from the cool temperature and the occasional autumn wind, there was truly no visual sign of autumn. Simply put, it was barren. As far as the eye could see, it was all scarlet plain land and a patch of simple buildings that had only recently been completed. At this time, stone material was already piled high here. Countless stone blocks were stacked together to form a stone mountain over 10 meters high and covering several miles in area. Paika left the column without a word and walked alone to the stone mountain under the gaze of many excited eyes. Although the workers had seen this several times before, their faces still showed anticipation. The next moment, his massive body, nearly 5 meters tall, was seen slowly merging into the surface of the stone mountain, quickly disappearing from everyone's sight. Afterward, all the stone blocks in the court spontaneously merged into one, transforming into a super stone giant over 200 meters tall. When it walked, it was as if the red line was trembling. The loud noise made the 3,000 workers in the distance and the army soldiers responsible for security further away feel their hearts tremble. The ability of the Parimsha system stone fruit is always so earth-shattering to witness. The workload of just one person is probably equivalent to that of 10,000. However, Paika didn't concern himself with these things, but seriously completed his work. As the stone giant strode forward, it molded the rocks in its hands into various soldier emplacements, machine gun fortifications, artillery positions, and 2 flat, wide stone roads. These were prepared for the tank group. At the same time, it also had to control the rocks under its feet to turn into continuously extending rotating drills to create underground tunnels. And the task of the 3,000 workers was to dig trenches and communication trenches behind it. This was war experience absorbed from the Demon Slayer world. After all, even when landing combat was needed in this world, it was mainly focused on beach assaults, close combat, or alley combat. Trenches were not very common. Paika couldn't help with this aspect, as his stone fruit ability could only control rocks and had no effect on ordinary soil. In short, the Army's hypothetical plan was that once other world troops invaded through the Stargate, they would use this place as the first battlefield to meet the enemy. 3 days later, the defensive works were basically completed. Paika led the workers and various construction equipment out of the RL-1558 zone. With a command from Army General Akainu, the 300,000 Army units, already prepared, surged forward, fully armed, and lined up to enter the trenches and fortifications. Heavy howitzers were pulled by the artillerymen to their respective positions and began adjusting their shooting parameters. Then, heavy tanks painted black waited in the distance. In the air, 20 flying warships led by Air Force Admirals Kizaru and Green Dragon divided into 2 battalions and slowly floated on the left and right. Their large-caliber naval guns pointed directly at the Stargate camp. As night fell, large searchlights illuminated the area as if it were daytime. Until the great sun rose the next day, golden light spilled onto the scarlet land, making the black soldiers, gun barrels, and cannon barrels shine brightly. Everyone had received sufficient rest. Finally, the first batch of Cipher Pol investigators and the Biochemical Research Institute's air quality inspectors arrived. Under the gaze of gun-wielding soldiers on both sides, they walked into the main gate of the Stargate camp without any hesitation. In was naturally watching all of this from high above. He found that there were no familiar figures among this group. This meant that the first batch of people entering the number 3 Stargate were all considered nameless passers-by. According to the report given to him by the 5 elders, these Cipher Pol agents and researchers had actually been informed of the danger of this mission and Kageya Yashiki's prophecy. But they still accepted. There was no coercion, it was purely voluntary. The world government promised them that regardless of the outcome, their family would receive a prize money of 10 million Bailey. At the same time, their children would receive the best education and training, and there would definitely be a spot for them in the future Academy City. If they returned alive, they would also be directly promoted by 1 rank. 20 minutes later, 6 Cipher Pol members and 4 researchers, wearing hazmat suits and carrying transponder snails connected by a line on their shoulders, passed through the disinfection process at the biochemical safety station. After exchanging glances, they stepped into the Stargate without hesitation. At the headquarters of the Otherworld Strategy Committee, the 6 committee members, led by Chairman Fernandez and Vice Chairman Kongming, all stared solemnly at the screen wall composed of dozens of virtual screens. Soon, the large screens, divided into 10, displayed the viewpoint screen feed of each investigator. The first thing they saw was not incoming bullet rain and cannon fire, but vast lowest sandy land and barren hills in the distance. Vegetation was also extremely sparse. It was easy to see that the soil here was severely eroded. And the sunlight was so intense that one could imagine the temperature must be very hot and dry. This was a dry barren land. The 5 elders in the room of authority exchanged glances. Kageya Yashiki's prophecy seemed to be true, at least the environment was the same as he described. In the screens, the 6 Cipher Pol members, after confirming they were not under attack, followed the original plan. 4 of them went to explore further in different directions, while the remaining 2 stayed behind to guard the researchers. At the same time, the 4 researchers began using equipment near the Stargate to test the air composition and content. Roar. 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 A few minutes later, a sudden loud noise rang out. 4 of the large screens showed surging, intense gunfire flash, and then completely went dark. No figures were seen throughout the entire process. Immediately after, the Stargate area was also covered by a barrage of cannon fire. Needless to say, all 6 people, including the transponder snails, were finished. This level of firepower was useless even with iron body. Everything happened too quickly, causing the military and political high command of the world government to frown. In this operation, they only obtained one clear intelligence: the air composition on the other side was not problematic, and the oxygen content was similar to that of the Demon Slayer world. Chapter 429, The Completely Surrounded Stargate. The complete annihilation of the first batch of advanced personnel made the atmosphere inside the Otherworld Strategy Committee very oppressive and heavy. It wasn't that Lieutenant General Kongming and others were particularly pained by the loss of those Cipher Pol members and researchers, but rather that it was confirmed the civilization on the other side of the Stargate was already prepared for their invasion. In other words, that Stargate, only 2 meters in width and length, was already targeted by a large amount of heavy firepower. Knock knock knock, come in. Chairman, this is the Weapons Research Institute's assessment report on the enemy's firepower. A young official knocked 3 times and walked in. Showing no discomfort towards the smoke-filled meeting room, he naturally placed a document on the table in front of Chairman Fernandez. You may leave. Yes. After the official exited the room, Fernandez finished reading the brief dozen or so sentences in the report, then immediately handed it to Lieutenant General Kongming beside him. Take a look. Okay. Lieutenant General Kongming took it and looked, his eyes widening in surprise. He said, high explosive landmines? Heavy howitzers. The report indicated that the first 4 Cipher Pol members who went ahead to explore were not hit by bombardment, but might have stepped on powerful landmines or composite multi-landmines. Because there was no whistling sound of cannonballs incoming in the footage, and the gunfire flash erupted from the bottom up. As for the 6 people near the Stargate, it was confirmed they were subjected to bombardment from heavy cannons. By pausing the explosion footage of the first cannonball, it was estimated to be a heavy howitzer with a caliber of over 100 millimeters. To be honest, this evaluation result made Lieutenant General Kongming feel a sense of relief. After all, whether it was landmines or howitzers, they were gunpowder weapons, and their power didn't seem overly outrageous. But this didn't mean they could completely relax their guard. No one knew if the enemy had even stronger weapon means. The most crucial point was that those 4 Cipher Pol actually stepped on landmines. Did they walk into a large-scale minefield, or did the enemy perform precise placement beforehand? It's important to know that the enemy possesses a very strong future sight ability. If it's the latter, then that's a huge problem. It's possible they're adapting their approach based on the opponent. The reason they used landmines and howitzers might simply be because they felt this level of weaponry was sufficient to deal with those few cipher Paul. We should dispatch more people to obtain more intelligence. If it's confirmed that the enemy's means are truly only at the level of heavy howitzers, we can consider deploying Admiral-level combat power. Lieutenant General Kong Ming said in a deep voice to Chairman Fernandez, while handing the document to another vice chairman. Should we continue to dispatch Cipher Paul, or the army? Cipher Paul. After all, they are the professional ones for exploration like this. However, this time there should be more people, and they must be able to use hockey, preferably also able to fly. At the very least, they need to ascertain the enemy's military strength and cannons. But just in case, do not dispatch combat power above Vice Admiral, otherwise, if the enemy uses stronger means, the losses will be too great. In Kong Ming's view, those above Vice Admiral are considered rare combat power, while those below are essentially expendable. Alright, does anyone else have any opinions? Chairman Fernandez was very confident in Lieutenant General Kong Ming's military acumen and had no intention of interfering. To put it plainly, his role as Chief of Staff of the Supreme Executive Committee, coming to be the chairman of the Other World Strategy Committee, was purely to support this department. Seeing the other vice chairmen shake their heads in indication, he immediately said, "Then that's settled. This old man will immediately notify Cipher Paul headquarters. Let's adjourn the meeting." After speaking, he was the first to stand up and leave the meeting room. The next day, 20 Cipher Paul member agents in suits and sunglasses assembled in front of the electric gate at the biochemical safety station. Upon closer inspection, among them were Cipher Paul 7 agent Poulin and Belloc, who had previously taken Big Mom on a tour of Kabinrai world. One was a bug fruit dragonfly form ability user, and the other was a bird fruit swallow form ability user. They were also the only two devil fruit users and users of two colors of hockey in the team. To be honest, while Cipher Paul seemed quite capable, that was in the areas of intelligence and assassination. There really weren't many who could use hockey. At least in terms of numbers, they were definitely far inferior compared to the military. Therefore, headquarters was simply unwilling to invest too many elite personnel in such high-risk missions. Move out. The captain of this operation was Poulin. There was no other reason than his strength being the greatest. Each of them had a transponder snail sitting on their shoulder, pulling a long black line. It's worth noting that the body surface of these transponder snails and the surface of the black lines were all wrapped in a layer of Kabinrai heart membrane material. Because it had been confirmed that the air composition of the world on the other side was fine, after undergoing triple disinfection, they rushed into the arid world inside the Stargate at the fastest speed. Then, with rapport, they formed pairs, one in front and one behind, turning into after images scattering in all directions. Especially Poulin and Belloc, who directly transformed into large dragonflies and large black swallows and flew towards high altitude. The requirement for this operation was just one word: fast. The researchers at the Weapons Research Institute had already calculated the position of the cannons based on the previous trajectory. The mission target for the two of them was to find them. At this moment, the military and political high command of the world government were all watching the virtual screen with varied expressions. Soon, with the high-speed movement of the 20 people, the environment around the Stargate became clearer and clearer. Experts from the Academy of Science specializing in geography and climate immediately confirmed. It should be a tropical desert climate region. The landform is mainly plain and sand dunes, and there seem to be quite a few mountain silhouettes to the north. But right at this moment, roar, roar, fierce explosion firelight appeared on the virtual screen again, followed by continuous explosions one after another, and then one black screen after another. Clearly, even with the Kabinrai heart membrane strengthening their defense, they couldn't withstand such powerful explosion attacks. It's confirmed, it's precise landmine placement. They actually predicted which position these Cipher Paul would walk to. Lieutenant General Kong Ming abruptly stood up, his expression extremely grim, and said in a deep voice. Because it was an action formation with one person in front and one behind, the latter's viewpoint allowed them to clearly see the former being attacked on the screen feed. And when the latter walked 2 more steps forward, preparing to stop, an explosion also occurred under their feet, and then they disappeared. In just a few seconds, 18 virtual screens had already gone dark. Fortunately, Poulin and Belloc's high-altitude viewpoints were still active. Through the footage they sent back, the world government first noticed that this was actually a peninsula surrounded by Great Sea on 3 sides. But the following scene stunned all the staff at the Alien Strategy Committee headquarters. First, on the Great Sea, hundreds of large ironclad battleships were anchored, all their ship cannons gun barrels uniformly aimed at the Stargate's position. Immediately after, in the only direction leading to the continent, on the earthy yellow arid land, dense trenches crisscrossed, and countless fortresses were scattered like stars. Armored trains equipped with large-caliber cannon barrels moved back and forth slowly and orderly along the railway. Tens of thousands of heavy howitzers were distributed across multiple positions. Further back were endless barracks buildings, seemingly stretching for dozens, even hundreds of miles. Just how much military strength was gathered here? Millions? That can only be considered a unit of measurement. Whoosh whoosh, suddenly, two more incredibly sharp whistling sounds pierced everyone's eardrums. Immediately after, Poulin and Bellic's viewpoints also went dark. The last screen feed scene was a surge of white mist and the two people's screams. Chapter 430, The Standoff Across the Stargate. On the Sea Star mainland, on the moon, within the top level of Noah's Ark, Im naturally saw everything. Although the formation displayed by the opposing world was indeed grand and magnificent, what concerned him more was that he still couldn't figure out what kind of world it was. First, it seemed to be an era during or after the Second World War. Although he wasn't a seasoned military enthusiast in his previous life, he could tell that those heavy howitzers and battleships were definitely not products of the First World War. Of course, asking him to name specific models was impossible, he just found them familiar. So, since their technology level was suspected to be at the Second World War level, they probably had nuclear bombs and the like, right? Right. Here's the matter, what kind of world, based on these foundations, also possessed a very strong future sight ability? Im pondered for a long time but remained completely bewildered. If it were just the former, there would be nothing to say, they would just start fighting. After all, it was only the Second World War level, and there was nothing to worry about except nuclear bombs. But with the addition of the future sight ability, the situation was different. Did the other side have other superpowers? Especially the attack method that ultimately killed Poulin and Bellic, it was definitely not a howitzer. One must know that those two possessed observation hockey. Even they didn't react in time, or rather, they reacted but were still precisely killed. That required deep thought. Indeed, mystery and the unknown were the biggest matters. At this moment, the chairman of the Other World Strategy Committee were holding an emergency meeting. Marshal Raymond of the Army Headquarters, Sakazuki, Burndai World, and officers above the rank of Vice Admiral, such as Bullet, Crocodile, and Shiryu, who had specifically rushed over from the Kabanrai World and Demon Slayer World, were also in a meeting. In the Holy Land Mary Ejos, within the Room of Authority, the five elders were repeatedly watching every piece of video footage obtained at the cost of lives, especially the continuous battle formations and barracks stretching for who knows how many miles at the end. The military strength definitely exceeds 10 million, and judging by their cannons and warships, they are clearly stronger than the Demon Slayer World. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn said with a frown. I never expected such a situation to arise. This is definitely not something they prepared recently, it must have taken at least 2 or 3 years of preparation, right? Saint Topman Warcurry sighed. A 10 million level army, how much manpower and material resources would that require? And those trenches, fortresses, and railways must have also taken a considerable amount of time to build, right? Unless the other side also had high-level builders with superpowers similar to Pika or Teach. This must be the combined strength of their entire world, their future sight ability can really see far. Saint Marcus Mars stood beside them, clicking his tongue in wonder. One must know that the Yubuyashiki family could only see the future within a year, and it seemed to require certain specific individuals as a medium. But the other side clearly didn't need these things. Unless someone from the other side had infiltrated the Sea Star mainland? Thinking of this possibility, the smile on Saint Marcus Mars's face gradually disappeared, his gaze turned cold, and he said in a low voice. We might have truly met our opponent this time. As soon as he said this, the other four fell silent. After a moment, Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn spoke again. After all, matters like war were his responsibility. There are 3 main matters before us now. First, we don't understand the other side's background, especially the origin of their future sight, and whether they have other unconventional means. Second, should we still send people in? Third, the Stargate is too small. After speaking, even the usually strong-willed Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn couldn't help but sigh. Understanding his feeling, Saint Shepherd Jupiter nodded and continued in a deep voice. The first point and the second point are actually one matter, whether or not to dispatch higher-rank combat power, such as vice admirals, or even admirals. But no one knows if the other side can still kill them. If they can, the loss would be too great. Then there's the third point. The Stargate is only 2 meters wide and 3 meters high. Troops can only enter in a trickle manner. But the other side already has tens of thousands of heavy howitzers and thousands of large-caliber naval guns aimed at it. Basically, anyone from the lower middle ranks who goes in will die. At this point, After he finished speaking, Saint Marcus Mars added a sentence, expressing his previous concern. There's another point we must be careful about. Is it possible for the other side to actively send people in? That should be impossible. The Stargate size is not just restrictive for us. If the other side wants to come in, they also have to squeeze in little by little. Our cannon fire here is not to be trifled with either. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn shook his head decisively, denying his idea. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room of authority fell into dead silence. No one spoke again, because they were all deep in thought and hesitation. The situation seemed to have reached a stalemate. Im also thought of these things, so he was considering one matter. That was whether to upgrade this number 3 Stargate to a medium Stargate. He happened to have an authority for this now, and doing so would basically solve the matter of the Stargate being too small and the efficiency of the large army passing through being too low. One must know that a medium Stargate is 300 meters high and 200 meters wide. This large size and space would be enough for the giant unit to push through. But if the Stargate becomes larger, the other side can easily come in. If things go badly, it could become a situation that's too big to handle, unless we close it directly. Finally, Im felt that pondering by himself was useless, so he directly transmitted the files that a Stargate could be enlarged to the 5 elders. Let them worry about such overly troublesome matters. A few minutes later, the 5 elders' expressions were all filled with shock. They hadn't expected that the Stargate could become even larger. 300 meters high, 200 meters wide, that's completely enough. Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn stood up excitedly, gripping Shodai Kaitetsu, then looked towards the direction of the moon with worship, sighing. As expected of Lord Amu. Such a miracle, besides a true god, who else could achieve it? However, after they calmed down and studied it carefully, they also realized the matter Im had thought of. If the Stargate became larger, it would also be convenient for the other side. We still need to figure out the upper limit of the other side's attack method, that is, whether they have the ability to harm Admiral-level combat power. St. Topman Warcurry sighed. Indeed, with the bombardment of tens of thousands of heavy howitzers and thousands of large-caliber naval guns, Vice Admiral-level combat power definitely can't withstand it. Sending them over would only consume a few more boxes of cannonballs for the other side. But if we dispatch Admiral-level combat power, the matter is, who should we send to take this risk, which has a probability of death of over 50%? St. Shepherd Jupiter, as a top boss of Cypherpol, placed more importance on intelligence. He pointed out the most difficult point. If this admiral is to probe the other side's upper limit, they must first withstand the bombardment of tens of thousands of cannons, fight their way into the other side's faction, and engage in slaughter to see if the other side has some means that can injure or even kill them. If they don't, then so be it, our admiral-level combat power can all be dispatched. But if they do, then he probably won't be coming back. Chapter 431, Ghosts and Black Shadows. Boom. 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 Cannonballs filled the sky, accompanied by the piercing whistling sound of them cutting through the air, swiftly streaking across the clear blue sky. They finally landed, transforming into surging gunfire flashes and explosive shock waves. The ground was violently shaken by the bombardment, and from time to time, many yellowish-brown debris fragments could be seen splashing outwards. In the blink of an eye, dust and gun smoke enveloped the glowing Stargate. Naturally, the other side of the Stargate was still the internal space of the biochemical safety station. In fact, the Army headquarters had previously proposed dismantling it because they found it too cumbersome. Because the Stargate itself wasn't large, the presence of this disinfection facility further affected the troops' passage efficiency. Furthermore, it had already been confirmed that the air content in the opposing world was normal, and there hadn't been any virus transmission issues in the previous Kabanrai world and Demon Slayer world. So, it was better to skip these cumbersome procedures. However, after this proposal was heard by the Biochemical Research Institute of the Academy of Science, it was met with fierce opposition from Dr. Fritz, who even directly cursed the Army higher-ups as idiots. The role of the Biochemical Safety Station is not only to defend against viruses from the other world but also to prevent their own viruses from entering the other world. Moreover, once a hostile world projects bioweapons towards the Stargate, such as poison gas bombs, then this Biochemical Safety Station serves as the first defense line. After hearing this, Marshal Raymond and the others didn't say much more. After all, they also had quite a stock of things like poison gas bombs. But regarding such things, if there's no need, it's best not to use them if possible. At this moment, Charlotte Cracker, who was already a rear admiral at the Army headquarters, stood in front of the Stargate with an unpleasant expression. Behind him were his 2 older brothers, Charlotte Oven and Charlotte Daifuku, although they were now vice admirals. Besides them, there were several other Army officers. One of the rear admirals sighed. As expected, it's not working. The other side intends to completely seal us off. Just now, Cracker had used the ability of the Parimsha system biscuit fruit to create 300 biscuit soldiers. However, shortly after they all passed through the Stargate, they were overwhelmed by countless cannon fire. There was nothing he could do. He was only 21 years old now, his ability hadn't awakened yet, and the hardness of these biscuits couldn't reach the level of the future. The current problem is that transponder snails can't stay permanently on the other side. We are no different from blind people right now. Another Army Rear Admiral said helplessly. Look on the bright side, isn't the other side the same? Daifuku glanced at Oven, who had gone over to comfort Cracker, and then said. Compared to that, I'm more surprised by the future sight ability the other side has shown. Didn't you notice? The other side chose to open fire only after all the biscuit soldiers had passed through, not from the beginning or halfway through. Doesn't this mean the other side actually knew how many we would send over long ago? Hearing these words, everyone exchanged glances, feeling increasingly that the other world civilization they had encountered this time was difficult and troublesome to deal with. Swish, at this moment, the third electric gate behind everyone opened, and a smell of disinfectant mist immediately surged out. Fortunately, everyone was already used to this somewhat pungent scent. Instead, the newcomers were more attention-grabbing. Crocodile Vice Admiral. Yes, the leader was none other than the Army Admiral candidate who had returned from the Demon Slayer world, Crocodile. Following behind him were two figures who were both familiar and unfamiliar. The higher-ups are also very curious about how far the other side's future sight ability can reach, so next, we are going to conduct an experiment. Immediately after, Crocodile began introducing the people behind him, starting with the person to his left, who was shorter, less than 3 meters, but was dressed in a suit and had a slender build. This is Brook of Cypher Pal 9 agent, a Parimsha system Yami no Mi user. Yo, nice to meet you. Please take care of me. Brook took off the black hat on his head and bowed, performing a gentleman's gesture. However, at this time, he wasn't showing his skeleton face to people. Instead, he had applied a layer of simulated mask, making him look very similar to his past self. This was because his skeleton face image was already that of the world star Soul King to the outside world, so he had to hide this point when performing missions. What was interesting was that everyone thought the Soul King's skeleton face was actually a hood or a mask, while these Army Lieutenant Generals and Rear Admirals present all took the real mask as Brook's actual face. Crocodile then continued to introduce the little giant standing to his right, who was nearly 7 meters tall. And this is Gecko Moria, a jailer from Impel Down. He is a Parimsha system shadow fruit user. I presume some of you here have heard of him before? It's him. I heard before that he was captured by the the current Air Force Admiral Kizaru and sent to Impel Down. I didn't expect him to become a prison guard instead of a prisoner. The Army Rear Admirals continuously sized up the grinning Moria with surprised gazes, discussing in low voices. However, the latter didn't care at all. Hey, Gecko Moria was in a wonderful mood right now. He never expected to have a chance to come out and travel, and even witness the scenery of an other world with his own eyes, especially an other world in a state of war. It sounded very interesting. So what are they planning to do? Charlotte Oven asked curiously. Brook and Moria have 3 missions. Crocodile said this while lighting a cigar for himself, completely ignoring the no-smoking sign posted on the metal wall in the distance. First, determine the extent of the other side's future sight, specifically whether they can see things invisible to the naked eye, such as souls. Second, determine if the other side has any attack or capture means targeting non-material things, such as souls or shadows. Third, investigate any valuable intelligence as much as possible. Unfortunately, they can't bring transponder snails with them, so they can only explain what they saw after returning. This couldn't be helped. Transponder snails couldn't undergo soul transformation, much less shadow transformation, but it was still better than having no means at all. So that's it, a brilliant idea. Charlotte Daifuku exclaimed in pleasant surprise and praised it greatly. The other Army Lieutenant Generals and Rear Admirals also nodded repeatedly. Some even thought to themselves. That's right, the other side has future sight ability, but we also have devil fruit abilities. Isn't it just a competition of unconventional means? Who's afraid of whom? Alright then, you two can begin. Crocodile said to Brook and Moria in a deep voice. A very exciting mission, I will give it my all. Brook replied cheerfully, then didn't mind the dust on the ground and directly sat cross-legged. As for Moria, it was much simpler, he immediately activated the devil fruit power within his body. They only heard him shout loudly with a grin. Come out, shadow doppelganger. The next moment, the shadow beneath Moria twisted like a black paper figure, then stood up from the 2-dimensional world tightly attached to the ground, becoming a black-purple little giant existing in the 3-dimensional world, with an outline identical to his own. On the other side, because it hadn't entered the Stargate yet, the soul that floated out from within Brooke also didn't hide itself. Instead, it drifted in midair in front of everyone like a dark green ghost. Go, and good luck. Crocodile let out a light chuckle, but once he started laughing, he couldn't stop, and it immediately turned into a long, gasping laugh. The shadow doppelganger and the ghost, whose form was gradually fading, flew into the Stargate accompanied by such peculiar laughter. Ha! 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 Chapter 432, Hunter x Hunter World? Regarding Moria and Brooke's Phantom Operation, the Five Elders, the Other World Strategy Committee, the Three Forces, Cypher Paul, and other military and political high command members gave it a high degree of importance. Especially he only wanted to know one thing now: what world was on the other side? To be honest, there was no need to understand it in great detail, they just needed to find one or two key points sufficient for confirmation. For example, if it were the ninja world, hearing terms like ninja, chakra, and land of fire would be enough to be 80% certain. Once the identity of the opposing world was confirmed, everything would be simple. If they could win, they would fight; if not, they would directly close the Stargate. However, a very strange situation occurred. Because the Stargate was truly like a door, once opened, they could see the screen feed from both inside and outside, allowing them to observe within a short distance. Therefore, Crocodile, Daifuku, Oven, Cracker, and others on the other side of the Stargate were surprised to find that although the shadow doppelganger had clearly passed through, there was absolutely no cannon fire coming down, allowing it to fly over easily. What was this situation? Let alone those present, even the Five Elders, Ryman, Sengoku, Kongming, and others watching via live broadcast were stunned. What did it mean that the other side wasn't obstructing them at all? If we had known this, we could have just had the shadow doppelganger take 2 transponder snails over. Vice Chairman Gabriel of the Other World Strategy Committee headquarters couldn't help but complain. Lieutenant General Kongming also didn't know whether to laugh or cry, saying, "First, let the shadow doppelganger circle around their military formation. If there's truly no commotion at all, then have it come back for the transponder snail." But he was very puzzled. Why would the opposing world do this? Did they think the shadow doppelganger was insignificant? The current situation made him feel very strange. But in that case, we can't even be sure if they have the ability to detect and deal with Brooke's soul. After all, it's also possible that the other side has already discovered Brooke but hasn't done anything. Chairman Fernandez said with a speechless expression. He sincerely felt that the opposing world's reaction was like that of a madman, not playing by the usual rules at all. About an hour later, Moria followed the order of the Other World Strategy Committee and had the shadow doppelganger fly back. Whoosh! Whoosh! Just as it walked out of the Stargate holding a transponder snail connected to a black line, before it had even taken 2 steps, a sharp whistling sound appeared in the air, followed immediately by 2 shells exploding instantly in front of it. The gushing hot gunfire flash and shockwave engulfed the Stargate, sending a portion of the flame and impact into the Stargate. Humphrey. Fortunately, Crocodile acted in time at this moment, waving his hand and throwing out a large amount of yellow sand to block all the fire, light, and chi. Otherwise, it really might have scorched the floor of the biochemical safety station. As for injuring anyone, that was impossible. The weakest person present was an Army Rear Admiral. The mere aftershock of a shell couldn't be so rampant. It was just that the line connected to the transponder snail was definitely burned through. Damn it, the transponder snail is dead. At this moment, Gecko Moria had a look of bad luck and dissatisfaction, but his shadow doppelganger was fine. After all, it was just a mass of shadow. The other side is targeting the transponder snail. This shows they clearly understand what a transponder snail is. Their future sight ability is indeed powerful. Saint Shepherd Jupiter in the room of authority sighed upon seeing this scene. So no matter what we do, the other side has already calculated it. To be honest, he felt the other side was being a bit unfair. They had truly mastered future sight. It was just a pity that their side's Kageya Yashiki was a bit lacking in this regard. Although he had helped the world government avoid a wave of casualties, as one of the 5 elders, they wouldn't thank the other side for this. This makes things difficult now. It seems our future intelligence can only be understood through the verbal accounts of Brooke and Moria. St. Marcus Mars, standing nearby, said helplessly, spreading his hands. St. Topman Warcurry said thoughtfully. But one thing is very clear, the other side is preventing us from getting their intelligence. Isn't that normal? Since it's war, they must guard against intelligence leaks. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn didn't find this strange at all. He only heard St. Topman Warcurry continue. This old man means that since the other side already knows everything about the future, they must have some understanding of the relative strength of both sides' combat power. If the other side feels they are stronger than us, why don't they actively attack? Instead, they choose a stalemate. You know, an army of tens of millions consumes astronomical amounts of supplies every day. Hearing his thoughts, the four fell into a brief silence. Then, Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn said hesitantly, "Is it possible that the other side knows the Stargate can be closed, and so, to avoid being trapped in our world, they never intended to send people in from the start?" Saint Topman Warcurry frowned and nodded inwardly. There was indeed this possibility. Knowing that the authority to open and close the Stargate was in their hands, the other side would certainly not dare to easily step in. Now, the situation seemed to have fallen into a stalemate again. On the moon, Im was even more speechless. To be honest, relying on verbal descriptions, he really wasn't confident he could guess the identity of the opposing world, unless very classic exclusive terms appeared. Speaking of which, even if he saw a certain character, could he really recognize them? The appearance in reality and the image in anime were definitely different. Unless the other side was wearing extremely familiar eyes attire, relying solely on looks, it wasn't necessarily possible to recognize them. 5 hours later, Brooks' soul returned, bringing back intelligence that left them speechless. The other side's faction is too large. Just floating around by myself, I couldn't see much, but I did remember the approximate position of the artillery emplacement. Brooks said awkwardly as he stand up. Did you find the other side's command center? Also, the name of their influence, or anything that looked very peculiar? Crocodile asked, biting his smoking cigar. I didn't see anything strange. Everywhere were soldiers holding guns, machine gun fortifications, armored trains running on tracks, and large numbers of howitzers. Brooks said as he recalled. But there's a serious problem. I couldn't understand or read the other side's language and writing at all, so I couldn't find their command center. There was no Wa language or English language there? Crocodile looked at Brooke in surprise. He knew that the two other worlds they had encountered so far, the Kabanarai world and the Demon Slayer world, both had these two languages, although there were slight grammatical differences. So he really hadn't expected language and writing to be an obstacle. No. Brooke shook head with certainty and said. Even if there was, it couldn't have been their main language. This information left the world government's higher-ups even more speechless. The difficulty had increased by another level. However, Im's eyes lit up. A world with writing completely different from reality. This wasn't common in Japanese anime and manga works, essentially narrowing down the scope significantly. The key point was that in his impression, there was one work whose writing was very peculiar, and he had a rather deep impression of it. Could it be the Hunter x Hunter world? Im immediately gave an order to the 5 elders, telling them to instruct Brooke to write down the writing he saw. A moment later, after the order was passed down through the ranks, it reached Brooke. Brooke naturally had no opinion. He asked for a piece of paper and wrote down over a dozen strange pieces of writing. But after Im saw it, his face darkened. It's not. Then there was nothing he could do. After all, he was only somewhat familiarized with Hunter script, he didn't recognize the writing of other worlds. What should they do now? Chapter 433, Sending an Admiral Over to Take Risks. Bang, in the high-level meeting room of the Army headquarters, Verndai World slammed his hand on the table in frustration, impatiently shouting at Marshal Raymond, who was seated at the head. Fleet Admiral, I say stop being afraid of this and that. Doesn't the other side just have the future sight ability? Their attack method from start to finish is howitzers, at most adding those ship cannons on the sea. Let me rush over and beat them up, whatever means they have will naturally be used then. He truly couldn't stand the world government's current way of doing things. They were too cautious, too careful. It was just future sight, what was there to be afraid of? As long as their side was stronger than the opponent, what did it matter if the opponent knew beforehand? Then how can you be sure the opponent doesn't have stronger attack methods? But Sakazuki, sitting across from him, asked with a cold expression, his hands crossed on his chest. This old man isn't sure. But this old man believes strength decides everything. No matter what means the opponent has, fight first and talk later. Adapt as you fight. Ward retorted angrily. As soon as he said this, many vice admirals present nodded in agreement. Even Bullet felt that Ward was right. It was truly unbearable being blocked at the Stargate and unable to leave these past few days. One must know that everyone present basically had a hawkish personality. Coupled with the Sea Star powerhouse's consistent strong attack, strong offense way of thinking, they strongly disliked the higher-ups probing ideas. In fact, Sakazuki himself was also somewhat annoyed. The Stargate is only 2 meters wide and is being watched by 10,000 howitzers, so large troops definitely can't enter. If we're going to fight, we can only assemble an elite squad, and this squad's opponent is an army of tens of millions and unknown unconventional means. Who among you will go? Marshal Raymond expressionlessly swept his gaze over all the army officers present. Every person whose gaze was met straightened their chest and head, fearlessly returning the former's gaze. Look at who is present. Army General Sakazuki, Army General World, Candidate Admiral Douglas Barrett, Candidate Admiral Sir Crocodile. Ensure you of the Rain, Diamond Jazu, Flowers Sword Vista, Charlotte Dai Fuku, Charlotte Oven, and 12 other Army Lieutenant Generals with imposing aura. None of these people feared war, instead, they all showed eager expressions. Howitzer bombardment, although it looked terrifying, and being hit too many times could indeed threaten the lives of these vice admirals, they could just fly over from the air using moonwalk, and also avoid stepping on landmines. As for the plight of those two Cypherpol who were taken out in the air before, it only showed that the opponent indeed had anti-air attack methods, but whether they could injure themselves was another matter, as their strength was much greater than those two. Alright, this old man will report to the 5 elders later for instructions. Adjourn the meeting. Marshal Raymond actually also wanted to know if the other world at Stargate number 3 had the ability to deal with their side's mid to high level combatants. Otherwise, dragging on like this wasn't a solution, was it? The dignified world government was blocked and couldn't even enter the door, it was too embarrassing. What they didn't know was that Saint Topman Warcurry in the room of authority was lightly chuckling at this moment. Actually, we can completely drag this out. The opponent has gathered an army of tens of millions. This old man doesn't believe they can stay there indefinitely. Problems will arise within them sooner or later. On the contrary, our side only needs to ensure 100,000 troops remain on guard. As the world government's chief steward, he understood supplies, logistics, transportation, and other aspects best. Therefore, in his view, there was no need to rush into war at all. But St. Jaga Ursha Saturn disagreed with this statement. We can't compare consumption with the other side without even fighting a single battle. Who knows if they are paper tigers, playing tricks with future sight, but their actual strength isn't much. Howitzers, landmines, warships, machine guns, and the opponent's individual weapons are repeating rifles with magazine feeding. These things are just numerous. As for any other unconventional means, they are still purely speculation at his point. His words received the support of Saint Shepherd Jupiter. The latter was seen sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed, speaking faintly. No matter what, we must at least establish our own position on the other side of the Stargate. We can't just keep watching from across the Stargate, can we? Then we need to find a way to withstand the opponent's bombardment of 10,000 guns. Do we have such means now? St. Topman Warcurry retorted. 10,000 heavy howitzers plus ship cannons from 1,000 heavily armed battleships. The firepower of cannon fire on this scale was no joke. They say when people number 10,000, they are boundless, then 10,000 heavy guns are much more spectacular. The opponent's world definitely pulled over all the howitzers in the whole world, and it's even possible they built some new ones in the past few years, otherwise, there couldn't be so many. The 4 of them fell silent, all pondering this matter. Did they have anything that could cover the zone around the Stargate and also withstand the continuous bombardment of cannon fire? The Parimsha system's barrier fruit. This was the devil fruit ability that came to their minds first. But the problem was that Kurizumi Semimaru was killed by Kaido with a single blow. Who knew where this devil fruit would undergo rebirth? But besides that, there seemed to be nothing else. Just at this moment, Marshal Raymond's application document arrived. After the 5 elders finished reading it, they looked at each other, and finally, St. Jaga Ursha Saturn was the first to speak. This old man thinks what Ryman said is correct. First, send an admiral and a few vice admirals to fight over and see. No matter what, we have to try first. As for the risk, this is a war between 2 worlds, we cannot be too timid. The necessary sacrifice actually needs to be borne. Then who should we send? St. Jaga Ursha Saturn asked in a deep voice, holding the cane in his hand. The second meaning of his words was, if the opponent truly had the means to kill admiral-level combat power, then who would take the risk of potentially dying? The leading army general will be Burndai World. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn didn't think too much. Although Burndai World's strength was quite a bit stronger than the other army general Sakazuki, he still chose the former. There were many reasons, which wouldn't be explained one by one. Those who understood would understand, and those who didn't wouldn't understand even if told. But the problem is, if Burndai World dies in the world on the other side, will the Momomomo fruit remain there for rebirth, or will it return to our world? Suddenly, St. Marcus Mars, who was in charge of the Academy of Science, suddenly asked with his hands in his pockets. This. St. Jaga Ursha Saturn was stunned, and the other 3 also changed their expressions. That's right, Burndai World himself wasn't much, if he was sacrificed, he was sacrificed. After all, he was a character who only had admiral-level combat power by multiplying his size 100-fold. But the value of the Parimshas system's Momo fruit was immense. If this thing was obtained by the opponent's world, it would definitely cause endless future trouble. Saint Topman Warcurry immediately said, "Right, we cannot let Burndeye World go. If he doesn't go, should we let Akanya go? You're reluctant to part with the Momo fruit, but are you willing to part with the Logia system's Magmag fruit?" Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn retorted. Saint Shepherd Jupiter also chimed in. "If we follow this line of thought, wouldn't we only be able to send Garp? After all, among the Admiral-level combatants, he seems to be the only non-ability user, right?" The 5 elders fell silent again. Everyone shook their heads and sighed with helpless expressions. Before knowing whether the opponent had the means to kill Admiral-level combat power, all precious devil fruit users could not be easily sacrificed. What should be done now? The situation once again fell into a stalemate. Chapter 434, Nuclear Explosion? Ultimately, the 5 elders could only submit the final decision to Lord Amu. After understanding the details, Im was also speechless. However, he could understand their idea of considering the worst possible outcome. After all, the devil fruit ability of every admiral is extremely powerful and precious, so it made sense to send the non-ability user Garp to take the risk. But Im did not want to sacrifice Garp. Even without considering other factors, Garp's talent in martial arts and hockey alone has infinite potential. He is currently only limited by the world. But when he can break through the limit of hockey like himself in the future, and even break through the limit of martial arts, he will definitely be a major super combat power for the world government in the future. Therefore, in Im's view, Burndeye World's value was truly not as great as Garp's. What about compared to Akainu Sakazuki? Still not as great. For no other reason than that Im preferred Sakazuki, even if many people in his previous life cursed him, because Sakazuki is an extremely competent soldier. A soldier must obey orders. Being able to absolutely obey orders makes a good soldier. From his current stance, this is the case. Therefore, the final decision was still to have Burndeye World lead the charge. I refuse to believe it. A mere Stargate can't be crossed? Im's ice-cold gaze watched the faintly glowing number 3 Stargate through star fate, murmuring softly. I want to see which world is behind this gate, that it is so troublesome. Once he discovered that the opposite world's strength was not strong, he would immediately upgrade the Stargate, and then send the Army and Air Force in on a large scale to completely crush the opponent's so-called million-strong army. On the other side, the 5 elders received Lord Amu's order without any hesitation and directly transmitted the order to Marshal Raymond of the Army headquarters. Marshal Raymond then notified officers above the rank of Vice Admiral. After all, besides Burndeye World, they also had to consider sending several Vice Admirals, and who these Vice Admirals would be. However, the efficiency in this regard was much faster. The next day, Army General Burndeye World, leading 5 Army Lieutenant Generals and 10 Rear Admirals behind him, appeared before the glowing Stargate inside the Biochemical Safety Station. Among the few, the more famous one was Diamond Jazu, while the others belonged to the ranks of nameless generals. In fact, Marshal Raymond had considered choosing elite Vice Admirals like Oven, Daifuku, and Shiryu, but due to the subtle influence exerted by him through the 5 elders, he did not let these potential stocks take the risk. Jazu was chosen because of his powerful defense. Remember, after passing through the Stargate, do not hesitate at all. Fly directly into the air, and then follow this old man to charge towards the enemy position at full speed. Burndeye World instructed the 15 people behind him. Yes, General Black Rhino. Jazu and the 15 Vice Admirals and Rear Admirals responded in unison. Depart. Burndeye World roared, simultaneously activating the Momo fruit ability within his body, first applying a tenfold speed effect to himself, and then immediately transforming into an afterimage as he charged towards the arid world on the other side of the Stargate. Swish swish swish, immediately after, Jazu and the others also moved at high-speed movement. Their current speed, in the eyes of ordinary people, was like a motorcycle speeding past, their entire figures becoming very blurry. However, Jazu's speed seemed to be the slowest. But just as Burndeye World, who was leading the way, was less than 10 meters out of the Stargate, his observation Haki perceived something. He subconsciously looked up, only to see a blinding white light instantly erupt in his line of sight. Not good. Boom, explosion, great explosion, super great explosion. The entire world seemed to turn white in this instant. Immediately after, the air began to burn, and the ground was melting, shattering, and cracking layer by layer. Even the light, heat, and mist pouring in from the Stargate completely blew open the entire biochemical safety station from the inside. Everything was burning, even melting. This scene left all the army soldiers present stunned and wide-eyed. The 5 elders, Raiman, Sengoku, Okainu, Kizaru, and Okiji also became solemn. Nuclear bomb? On the moon, who was in front of the virtual screen, suddenly stood up. Although the transponder snail only transmitted a fleeting white light, seeing the scene of the biochemical safety station being destroyed through the viewpoint of other transponder snails, he immediately recalled this term. That's right, the opposite world's heavy howitzers and those heavy battleships are clearly things from the World War II era. Atomic bombs should already exist. As for hydrogen bombs, that shouldn't be the case. This thing is from after World War II. Of course. Since it's another world, it's not impossible, but the possibility is too low. No, we should immediately send people to check if any radiation has entered. Immediately picked up the golden den mushy and called St. Topman Workery. As for the situation of Burndie World, Jazu, and the others, he didn't know. After all, he had never been hit by a nuclear bomb either. The key was the timing of the opponent's nuclear bomb dropping. It was definitely adjusted using the ability of future sight. This meant that Burndie World and the others were right at the explosion center of the atomic bomb. Then this. At this moment, RL 1558 area became somewhat chaos. The army soldiers on site didn't know how to handle it. Should they go over and check? Fortunately, not long after, a group of Cypherpol agents, along with a dozen biochemical researchers wearing hazmat suits, arrived at the scene on flying warships. The researchers were holding long, rod-shaped radiation detectors. They first sealed the camp gate, not allowing anyone to approach, and then the researchers cautiously walked into the ruins, simultaneously checking the radiation concentration on the instrument panels. But the further they walked in, the more strange the researchers inside the hazmat suits felt. Because they didn't see any numbers jumping, which indicated that there was no high-concentration radiation at all. Instead, they found the severely injured and unconscious Jazu inside. At this time, he had already exited his diamond human form. His entire body's skin was highly burned, not only red but also emitting wisps of heat all over. Needless to say, he was immediately sent to the medical department of the army headquarters. However, they continued searching but did not see any other figures. After the damaged ruins were cleared, the Stargate was still in its original position, emitting a faint radiance, completely unaffected. Okainu Sakazuki, who had already rushed to the scene to investigate, looked through the doorway towards the opposite world. His expression immediately changed drastically, because not far away, he saw a completely dead, charred corpse. It was Burndie World. But he did not see the remains of the other vice admirals and rear admirals. It was highly likely they were blown away by the explosion. Army General, Black Rhino, is dead. The world government actually lost an admiral-level combat power in this third other world? Although Burndie World only had admiral strength in his 100-fold state, regardless, he was still an admiral of the army headquarters. Now, this matter has escalated significantly. The Five Elders, the Other World Strategy Committee, the Army Headquarters, the Marine Headquarters, and even in Noah's Ark on the Moon fell into a long silence. Future Sight plus Center nuclear explosion, how do you deal with this thing? Knew that nuclear bombs could be mass-produced, and judging by the power of the explosion, it was clearly not a low-yield nuclear weapon below 100,000 tons. But there was something he found very strange, extremely strange. Why is there no nuclear radiation? Nuclear weapons, whether atomic bombs or hydrogen bombs, only differ in the amount of radiation. It's impossible for there to be none. Chapter 435, Fistbone Meteor plus Bomb Rock. This should buy us some time, right? Yes, that little giant they bombed to death was an important member among them. They won't be coming over anytime soon. We can proceed with the next step now. I hope it's useful. You and I both know it's impossible. Ultimately, we're still going to lose. You will die, and I will continue to be imprisoned here, working for them. It's just a matter of time. I know, but hey, we can only do our best to delay that day's arrival, not just for you and me, but so everyone else can enjoy one more day of freedom. Divider C-Star Mainland. The death of Burndie World was a heavy blow to the world government, shattering the pride and complacency they had built from conquering two worlds. Whether it was the Five Elders, the marshals of the three forces, Army, Navy, and Air Force, or the admirals, they fully realized. Otherworld conquest really does kill people. Even an admiral can die. The war with the Otherworld and the various conflicts and battles within the world were, one could say, completely different matters. The latter, no matter how they fought, was within everyone's familiar scope. But as for what abilities the former possessed and what means they would use, it could only be described as ever-changing and bizarre. Inside the command department's meeting room, Kong the Iron Fist, as the minister, sat at the head seat. On either side sat Marshal Ryman, who was both Army Marshal and Fleet Admiral of the Air Force, and Sengoku, the Fleet Admiral of the Marines. Following them were Marine Admiral Garp the Fist, Army General Akainu Sakazuki, Air Force Admiral Kizaru Borsellino, and Air Force Admiral Green Dragon Kaido. Also present, holding the admiral rank, were Zephyr Blackarm, the Minister of the Military and Political Department, and Tsuru, the Minister of the Staff Department, as well as Whitebeard Newgate and Big Mom Charlotte Linlin, who had been granted the honorary admiral rank. One could say, this room alone was worthy of being called the World Government Summit meeting. It was just a pity for Okiji Kyuzen, who was still a Navy admiral candidate and didn't have the qualifications to sit in a chair here, alas. Counterattack. We must counterattack. Marshal Ryman slammed the table in a fit of anger and shouted. They've gone completely against the heavens. If we don't teach them a lesson, they'll really think we're afraid of them. He was truly enraged. It wasn't that he had a good relationship with Bandai World, it was purely that he felt disgraced, filled with shame and indignation. From the first Stargate until now, the first admiral to die in combat was actually someone from his own army. Originally, being demoted from the position of Marshal of the Three Forces to Army Marshal was already quite dissatisfying. Now, he couldn't even do a good job as an Army Marshal. How would Kon and Sengoku look at him? How embarrassing. This old man also thinks we should fight back. If needed, I can go into combat. Edward Newgate's expression was incredibly cold, because Jazu was still lying on a hospital bed. If they bombed his son into severe injury, then this world of Stargate number 3 must pay the price. He wasn't a pirate anymore, but his pirate temper hadn't disappeared at all. Back then, Roger could destroy a nation's army because his crewmate was insulted. What did Whitebeard have to be afraid of? I think we should first figure out exactly what they used to bomb Bandai World and the others to death, and whether the opponent has even stronger means than this. Kong the Iron Fist could feel the anger in everyone's hearts, but he still maintained basic composure. But we can't even get through the gate, how can we gather information? Relying on Brook alone to wander around with his soul? How long will that take? Kaido asked impatiently in a deep voice. Indeed, the main issue is that inside the Stargate, it's difficult to observe the midair and the rear. We must gain a foothold on the other side of the Stargate and establish a position first. Sengoku nodded and offered his opinion. Immediately after, Garp crossed his arms over his chest and snorted coldly. Humphrey, this old man doesn't believe that kind of high-power attack from the opponent appeared out of thin air. There must be a process of release or attack. Once we understand the principle, we can figure out a way to deal with it. Hearing this, Kong the Iron Fist asked expressionlessly. Then, who will go and take one more hit? The meeting room fell silent. Garp and Newgate exchanged glances. Just as the two were about to volunteer for the mission, the meeting room door was gently knocked upon. Come in. Minister, this is a report sent from above. It says it contains a general introduction to nuclear weapons. An army colonel walked in holding a file bag and said respectfully. Please sit down. Yes. Marshal Ryman asked doubtfully. What is a nuclear weapon? He voiced what everyone present was thinking. But Kong the Iron Fist didn't know either, so he could only wait until he finished reading the document's content. A moment later, Kong placed the document in front of a visual den mushi, allowing it to project the images and text onto the meeting table in midair. Everyone, take a look. 5 minutes later, these admirals of the world had a basic understanding of nuclear weapons. Garp muttered. To put it simply, isn't it just a big bomb? Low power, medium power, high power. Looking at the description here of the explosion of a 10,000-ton TNT-yield atomic bomb, it seems similar in performance to a single bomb rock. Sengoku thought to himself, wondering what the yield of the bomb that killed Ward was. Mama, so that means the opponent might have a lot of these nuclear weapons, huh? That's really scary. Charlotte Linlin chuckled and grinned, but her smile looked terrifying no matter how you saw it. Marshal Ryman said. This thing can be mass-produced, so theoretically there should be many of them. However, this old man noticed it says here that nuclear weapons have some kind of radiation. But this time, the Biochemical Research Institute didn't detect nuclear radiation. Also, can we defend against this nuclear radiation? Regarding this question, IM received a clear answer from Vegapunk. His report stated that if nuclear radiation was indeed a type of radiation, then experimental proof from other types of radiation showed that armament hockey could resist it. But without armament hockey, it would inevitably cause significant changes to cells. However, it would be useless against someone like Mizunkia Butsuji, who has body control ability down to the cellular level. Or rather, it would only cause beneficial changes according to his will, because everything is within his control. As for ordinary C-star people, because the life force of C-star people is stronger than that of other worlders, the extent of nuclear radiation's effect on C-star people is unclear before experiments are conducted. The next day, after obtaining the consent of the 5 elders, the Other World Strategy Committee allowed the Army headquarters to launch a retaliatory counterattack against the Stargate No. 3 world. Immediately after, The Army headquarters applied for 10 bomb rocks, and then had the Academy of Science help stick them together and install them inside a cannonball. Yes, they were preparing to give the other side a nuclear strike as well. Isn't it just a head-on bombardment? Bring it on. This process took 3 days, mainly because bomb rock has always been a confidential matter of the world government, and due to its danger, it's not located on the Red Line at all. Therefore, flying warships from the Air Force had to be dispatched to handle the transport. If it were in the past, relying on the Marines' warships, it would have taken at least a week or more. The 6th day, Garp arrived at the newly built biochemical safety station. In front of him was the Stargate emitting a faint radiance. Beside him was a spherical cannonball with a diameter of 1.5 meters. Because the spherical shape made it convenient for him to throw it by hand. Behind him sat Brooke, cross-legged on the ground. At this moment, his soul had already left his body. Next, he was responsible for observing the explosion's effect on the other side of the world, and also Moria, who was watching from the side. Ha 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 ha, you little brats from the other world, taste this old man's fistbone meteor. Garp was seen laughing heartily with his head tilted back. Amidst the unrestrained laughter, he fiercely threw the large cannonball containing 10 bomb rocks like a baseball. The air in front of him even instantly exploded into a circle of white air current. Whoosh, a distance of dozens of kilometers was rapidly crossed in just a few minutes, and then a bright purple radiance appeared on the horizon at the other end of the line of sight. After waiting a few more minutes, the shock wave finally swept over, pushing forward rolling smoke and dust. So, what was the result? Chapter 436, The Stargate is sealed. What? This old man's super fistbone meteor didn't kill anyone? Garp stared dumbfounded at Brooke, who had just returned to his soul and stood up to report the situation to him. Meanwhile, the 5 elders, Kong, Ryman, Sengoku, and other higher-ups who were constantly monitoring the area through the surrounding transponder snails also frowned in unison. Yes, I saw a white curved wall appear in front of the opponent's position. It was probably 50 to 60 meters high, somewhat like something formed from wax liquid. It blocked most of the explosion energy from the bomb rock. And although the remaining energy was released after it shattered, the position was already empty. They must have evacuated the soldiers beforehand. However, Admiral Garp, the fortress, trenches, and railway tracks on that position were all blown away, so it wasn't completely without effect. Brooke kindly tried to console him. But his words only caused a string of black lines to appear on Garp's head, and his expression immediately fell, like an unhappy old prankster. That's right. At this moment, Sengoku said with a helpless expression. The opponent has a very strong future sight ability. Coupled with the fact that the Stargate is only 2 meters wide and 3 meters high, no matter what we project through, the direction is fixed in a straight line, so they just need to withdraw the people there in advance. The admirals present exchanged glances. So the problem had circled back again, they still needed to build a position outside the Stargate. Only then would their operational space and angles increase. But the problem was, according to the opponent's future sight ability, there was an 80% chance they would be hit by the nuclear weapon explosion as soon as they went out. If they sent in large numbers of low-rank troops, they would be subjected to carpet bombing from tens of thousands of heavy howitzers. It was unsolvable again. Hey, I really don't believe it. I just can't figure out what kind of world you are. Inside the luxurious palace of Noah's Ark, Im's mood wasn't great either. Or rather, the feeling of being unable to learn the opponent's identity for so long made him somewhat annoyed. Regardless of strength or weakness, victory or defeat, at least let him know who you are, right? That way, even if you are truly much stronger than me, I can still willingly close the Stargate, right? Now you don't even introduce yourself, isn't that a bit rude? Im continuously complained in his heart. A moment later, he issued a stern order to the 5 elders, find a way to capture another worlder from Stargate number 3. Yes. He planned to use the memory reading ability to look at the captive's memory screen feed. Although the languages were different and he probably wouldn't understand what was being said, he could definitely find some things he was familiar with. That would be enough. It's just that this order doesn't seem very easy either. Ultimately, the mission still fell to Gecko Moria. After all, only his shadow doppelganger could safely capture people right now. So the shadow doppelganger flew out of the Stargate again. It was the same as before, it wasn't subjected to any bombardment from heavy guns or other obstructions. But when it grabbed a desperately struggling gun-wielding soldier from the trench and flew back amidst numerous terrified gazes. Instantly, several muffled sounds rang out. In midair, both the shadow doppelganger and the soldier's body were shot through with large holes. Anti-tank rifles. Clearly, their meaning was simple: you black thing can wander around freely, and you can even kill a few people if you're interested, but you can't take living people away. Very cruel, but very effective at blocking intelligence. Under Gecko Moria's control, the shadow doppelganger grabbed a few more soldiers. Without exception, they were all targeted by anti-tank rifles or swept by heavy machine guns from multiple directions. Helplessly, Moria had no choice but to inform the big shots about the situation, and him quickly learned about it as well. What should we do if we can't capture a captive? Does he really have to make a move himself? To be honest, he didn't want to do that. Are you kidding? Without knowing what kind of world is on the other side, and what unconventional means they possess, he absolutely couldn't risk going himself. Otherwise, what's the point of having so many subordinates? But a high wall formed like white wax liquid. What kind of ability is this? Im frowned as he looked at the intelligence file recording Brooks' description. That's why, without clear pictures or footage, relying only on words or writing, it's really hard to tell what it is. But the opponent is clearly preventing transponder snails from getting close. This is very annoying. Speaking of which, encountering such a challenging otherworld, shouldn't we have someone do a public broadcast to make all the Sea Star people realize what the concept of otherworld war truly is? Of course, Im also knew that the combat death of an army general would definitely cause a huge uproar across the world, and even affect the world government's image. But compared to making most people develop a sense of crisis and combat readiness, this small price seems worth paying. Moreover, it would let everyone understand that the world government is genuinely fighting to compete for other world resources for the world. Besides, this kind of matter they will encounter sooner or later. There's nothing wrong with letting them get some exposure early on. The future world will definitely require the entire population to participate in all aspects of other world conquest. Even if you are planting grain, you must know that this grain is supplied to the army fighting on the other world front lines. We can first have the propaganda department make a video from the previously recorded footage. Im made the decision in his heart. At the same time, at 3:26 in the morning, just as the headquarters of the Other World Strategy Committee and the Command Department of the Supreme Military Command were holding a meeting overnight, thinking about how to break through the firepower and intelligence blockade of Stargate Number 3. A sudden situation turned into an urgent intelligence report that appeared before these higher-ups. The Stargate exit was sealed by extremely solid crystal, and outside it was covered with a layer of white substance that looked like wax liquid. Soon, the Other World Strategy Committee immediately dispatched an investigation team composed of personnel from multiple parties including the Academy of Science, Army Headquarters, and Cypher Pol. When did this happen? Sakazuki looked down at the 4 army soldiers responsible for guarding and asked coldly. Reporting, KNU Admiral. Looking at the playback footage from the transponder snail, it seems this layer of crystal was already there at 2:34, and just now, those white substances were added. The army soldier who replied said with trembling fear, gritting his teeth. There was nothing they could do, this time. It was indeed their dereliction of duty. Then why didn't you discover it at the time? Because it was transparent, and there was no sound, and also... Another army soldier stammered. Sakazuki looked at them expressionlessly and said. And also, your attention wasn't focused on the Stargate, right? Why yes, we are very sorry, KNU Admiral. These army soldiers could only grit their teeth and admit it. The truth is, although the Stargate allows you to see the scenery of another world, in the middle of the night, it's just blackness upon blackness. Who could keep staring at it? Go out and receive your punishment. Sakazuki turned his head and no longer paid attention to them. After all, these soldiers weren't deserting. It wasn't enough to warrant him using a great eruption on them. Compared to that, it's better to care about the situation at the Stargate. At this moment, Dr. Anasi from the Materials Research Institute under the Academy of Science, with the cooperation of 4 researchers, scanned the crystal's composition using a detection instrument. Such high strength and hardness. This thing can no longer be described using steel. But it doesn't look thick, and it's transparent. It's somewhat like a Kabinari heart membrane, but it's not on the same rank at all. If I had to describe it, it's similar to that of Vice Admiral Jazu's ability. Chapter 437, Sea Star Mainland Invaded? The Stargate being sealed off was truly an unexpected situation for everyone. However, this action from the opposite world also made the higher-ups of the world government realize that something was amiss. This shows that the other side is afraid of us. Inside the headquarters meeting room of the Other World Strategy Committee, Lieutenant General Kong Ming immediately scanned his colleagues and said with a firm tone. They encountered a problem in a certain environment and can no longer confront us across the Stargate, which is why they used what they believe to be the hardest substance to seal off the Stargate entrance and exit. I have to say, this is a foolish, childish, and naive approach. They have actively exposed the fact that they are weaker than us. In Kong Ming's view, if the other side could maintain the situation they had before sealing the gate, then their side would truly have no way to deal with it and would enter an unsolvable predicament for a long time. They might even consider actively sealing off the Stargate themselves. But for some unknown reason, the other side actually sealed the gate while their side held the advantage. What else could this be but a guilty conscience? Is it possible that they just don't want to continue the confrontation? After all, an army of millions consumes a considerable amount of resources daily. Plus, they are very confident in this super crystal and white substance, so... Vice Chairman Marin Whifflard, who was in charge of finance, voiced his thoughts. From an economy perspective, since they didn't intend to invade, sealing the gate once and for all is indeed the best choice. Immediately after, Vice Chairman Bulwer Gabriel, who was in charge of administration and management, also joined the discussion. There's something strange. They have such a strong future sight ability, which means this sealing the gate method is feasible. Otherwise, if we could easily break through it, they wouldn't have executed the plan. Finally, this big shot spread his hands and asked with a smile. So, can we actually solve the crystal blocking the Stargate? The Army headquarters should verify this themselves. We just need to wait for news. Chairman Fernandez, seated at the head, said in a deep voice. Thump thump thump. Suddenly, a few slightly hurried knocks sounded on the door, attracting the attention of the people present. One must know that they were in a meeting, and no one would disturb them unless it was an exceptionally urgent matter. Chairman, this is an intelligence file from Cypher Paul. It's the latest prophecy content regarding Kageya Yubuyashiki. What? Several exclamations echoed within the meeting room. Inside the biochemical safety station located at the Stargate number 0003 Stargate Camp, Garp, dressed in a black suit and white greatcoat, appeared before the Stargate once again. They fight halfway and then block the gate and stop fighting? Do the guys on the other side think this is kids playing games? Garp looked at the crystal and white substance inside the Stargate with a look of disdain and grumbled. That won't do. We lost 1 admiral, 5 vice admirals, 10 rear admirals, and 20 to 30 Cypher Paul agent and researchers on our side. They took advantage and ran? Dream on. Brooke, Moria, Dr. Anasi, and over a dozen army officers behind him couldn't help but smile wryly upon hearing this. Among them, the army officers had particularly complex expressions. Speaking of which, up until now, their side hadn't caused any damage to the opposite world. Oh. Right, that Gecko Moria did kill a few small soldiers before, but he was an impel-down prison guard. What did that have to do with their army? To be honest, these army personnel were filled with suppressed anger. On the other side, Garp bent his fingers and knocked on the smooth, transparent crystal a few times, grinning as he said. It's quite hard. I just don't know if it's harder than this old man's iron fist. Immediately, he turned to the people behind him and reminded them to move back a little. Once everything was ready, he took 2 steps back and then raised his massive right fist. With a hum, his fist was instantly covered in a metallic black sheen, but visually, it also displayed a faint, flowing aura. Garp's eyes, which had instantly become sharp, were now shining brightly. Wait. But just as he was about to throw this punch, an anxious voice suddenly sounded from behind him, stopping him. This made Garp turn around unhappily and coldly snort. Now what? Admiral Iron Fist, the other World Strategy Committee has issued an order to immediately stop the operation to break the crystal. The official who came to deliver the message said with a nervous expression. Why? Garp looked at him strangely, only to see the official hand him a document paper. He took it and unfolded it, his brows instantly furrowing. A moment later, he lowered his voice and murmured. How is that possible? Holy Land Marie Joais, Room of Authority. The atmosphere here was incredibly oppressive and heavy, as if the gravity of the entire space had increased several times, until Saint Jaga Ursha Saturn, looking surprised and uncertain at the intelligence in his hand, was the first to speak. Kageya Yubuyashiki actually said that the other side's troops will invade our homeland, and the entire RL 1558 area will completely become a battlefield? Saint Topman Warcurry nodded with a stern expression. Yes, isn't it written here? He saw a large number of 50 to 60 meter tall iron giants surging in like a tide through a giant stargate, rampaging across the red line, and our army units suffered heavy losses, including Kyojiro Rengoku and Yamai Haimjima who were just transferred over. Humphrey, I never expected our homeland to be invaded. This is truly. Even Saint Shepherd Jupiter, who always maintained a noble posture, was filled with anger. No one doubted Kageya Yubuyashiki's future sight ability anymore, especially since they had been tormented by the other side's future sight during this period. So, Lord Imu will still enlarge the Stargate in the future, and we will indeed break through the crystal they used to seal the Stargate, but this will also lead to a large-scale invasion by the other side's troops. St. Marcus Mars said thoughtfully. Furthermore, I am more interested in this giant unit wearing iron and being 50 to 60 meters tall. This is much taller than our Sea Star's giant tribe. Indeed, the giant tribe of Elbaf, even fully grown, are only a little over 20 meters tall. A height of 50 to 60 meters might not sound like much in numbers, but in reality, that's a monster as tall as a 20-story building. And the quantity also sounds like a lot. Then we must make a choice now. Should we gather more combat power and military power, prepare thoroughly, and then request Lord Imut to enlarge the Stargate for a full-scale war with the other side? Or should we maintain the current situation, or even request Lord Imut to close the Stargate? Saint Topman Warcurry said in a deep voice, sitting on the sofa with his fingers intertwined. This. Meanwhile, on the moon, Im naturally received the same intelligence. When he saw the words 50 to 60 meter tall giants, he first had a look of sudden realization. It's him. He felt like he knew the identity of the opposite world, but after seeing the description wearing iron, he wasn't so confident anymore. That's not right. If it were truly the rumbling, how could they wear iron? Even if they wanted to, they wouldn't have this many resources, right? Or is it not the rumbling, but some kind of mecha or robot? Im suspected that Kageyayubu Yashiki, who came from the Demon Slayer world, had never seen things like mecha or robots and simply regarded them as giants wearing iron. For example, cyberpunk-style giant mecha or large robots, because judging by the other side's heavy howitzer, heavy battleship, etc., it's clearly a world on the science side. To the readers who feel the pace is slow, I can only say that I will not change my pace for anyone. I will only firmly follow the outline and ideas, progressing layer by layer with the plot I want to write. Because the fast-paced transmigration style you want is something I won't write, nor is it the style of this book. I will not abandon the content I have already written in my outline for your sake. So, if you are impatient, you can save the book, go read other fast-paced transmigration novels, or even remove it from your shelf. I will continue to write step by step on my own. That's all I have to say. If you are willing to come back and take a look later, please do. Thank you. Chapter 438, All-Out War begins, Stargate upgrade. Regardless, the next fork in the road of the world's fate once again arrived before him, who was seated on the empty throne. As the true captain of the world government, this large ship, he had to quickly make a choice concerning the entire sea-star civilization. Either upgrade the third Stargate to medium-sized and wage all-out war against the opponent, or close the Stargate and concede defeat. Which to choose? Is it really the Attack on Titan world? If so, there's nothing to say, we definitely have to go to war. There's nothing to fear at all. But what if it's not? What if it's truly as I thought, and the other side is actually a powerful technological civilization with giant mecha or war robots, or even one that can achieve future sight through technology? Im could indeed close the Stargate at any time, but the problem was that the opponent had a very strong future sight ability, so they must also know this. Then why did they still dare to dispatch large troops to invade the world? A moment later, Im received another future vision personally drawn by Kageyayubu Yashiki. Although it was only drawn with a simple pencil, the drawing skill was indeed good. While it couldn't be called lifelike, it allowed people to clearly see the specific appearance of the hundreds of meters high Stargate and the iron-armored giants pouring in from below. The picture even included the combat postures of Garp, Newgate, Sakazuki, and others. Is the smoke on these iron-armored giants steam? Im squinted his eyes and scanned the drawing back and forth. He increasingly suspected these giants were products of the rumbling, but steam was also a major characteristic of punk civilization. It was perfectly normal for heavy robots of a punk civilization to emit steam. A steam civilization with future sight ability, capable of creating high-strength crystal and giant robots. Are there such fantasy works in Japanese anime and manga? Or rather, is the Stargate world actually not limited to Japanese anime and manga? It must be said, Im also fell into a dilemma. After all, he was not an omniscient and omnipotent true god. But in the end, he still had to make a decision. At the same time, the world government's propaganda department also started getting busy. According to the requirements of the higher-ups, they edited the recorded footage from the opening of the third Stargate into a 13-minute introductory video. The content was the various explorations and tug-of-wars conducted between the world government and the other world civilization during this period. It even included footage of Cypher-Pol members and Biochemical Research Institute researchers being attacked by the enemy. But the most impactful part was the content of Army General Black Rhino, Verndi World, and 15 vice admirals and rear admirals being blown up alive by the opponent. This attracted most of the citizens of the world. Their mood changed from initial curiosity and surprise, then to astonishment and shock, and now even turned into terror. Finally, the Sea Star people witnessed what other world conquest was like, a terrifying battlefield where even existences like admirals could die in battle. Immediately after, another world public broadcast began. The special correspondents from the propaganda department started entering RL 1855 area to install various visual den mushi. Morgans even came personally, becoming the only reporter responsible for aerial shots this time. Big news. Big news. There will definitely be big news. Ha 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 ha. Morgans was now completely unconcerned about the matter of his newspaper agency being forcibly annexed by the world government, because he had already discovered that he could now access more and bigger news. On the other side, Tesoro and Stella were currently sitting in the recording studio newly built by the media agency. They would next act as the most famous star couple, explaining the entire live broadcast process to the citizens of the whole world. It is worth mentioning that this live broadcast was also aimed at the Kubenrai world and Demon Slayer world, allowing them to deepen their impression of the world government. But these were not worth too much attention for the world government, because they are Henming now. Or rather, the Army, Air Force, and Marines were all busy. The command department had received orders from the 5 elders. The whole army was to initiate the highest level of war preparation. They decided to wage all-out war against this third other world. To be honest, as soon as this order arrived, it truly made Kon the Iron Fist, Raiman, Sengoku, Garp, Sakazuki, Newgate, Kaido, Bullet, and others blood boiling. They even thought the world government would likely back down. After all, for such uncertain matters, the 5 elders always habitually prioritize stability. But the person who made the decision this time was him. One who, although having 1,000 years of lifespan, is actually a young person who transmigrated from another world. Since the control of the Stargate switch was in his hands, Im was not afraid to fight them and see. If they really couldn't win, they would just close the door then. So, fight. With an order given, the world government began operating at full power. They directly designated RL 1558 area, where the third Stargate was located, and the adjacent RL 1557 area, where the second Stargate, the Demon Slayer Stargate, was located, as well as the empty RL 1559 area, as the main combat area. Immediately after, the construction department once again pulled over tons and tons of stone material, having Pika urgently create a 60-meter high wall that could enclose these 3 areas. As for fortresses, trenches, and the like, in front of the opponent's 50 to 60-meter high iron armor giants, they had no meaning at all. The Army headquarters dispatched 700,000 military strength to enter these 3 areas in batches. Plus the previous 300,000 army, they formed a 1,000,000-strong army. It's not that Marshal Raymond couldn't produce more military strength, but rather that these soldiers holding automatic rifles wouldn't have much more meaning no matter how many there were. It was better to keep them guarding the rear. However, heavy firepower was sufficient. One by one, heavy howitzers, which had long been modified into jet bullets, were pulled over. Together with the 2,000 heavy howitzers previously set up, they formed a massive artillery cluster numbering over 4,000. Don't think there are few cannons compared to the enemy world. After all, the army was only a second-rate force in the world government before. In fact, the main combat power of this war was actually still borne by the middle and higher-ups. Only they could deal with the 60-meter-high iron armor giants. Anyway, the current world government thinks this way. Look quickly. The giant unit. Wow. So many giant tribe members. At this moment, citizens in various places and countries across the world all exclaimed in surprise. Especially the Sabati archipelago, where humans and fishmen were mixed, screamed repeatedly. They stared dumbfounded at the spectacular scene on the super-large virtual screen. That was several thousand giant tribe warriors draped in black justice coats. They wore black armor whose surface was covered in blood-colored markings, holding various black great swords, black great sabers, and black great hammers also covered in blood-colored markings. Each of them had a height of around 20 meters, and the length of the formation was vast and mighty, could not be seen to the end at a glance. This was the current Army headquarters giant unit, numbering over 2,000. In addition to this, in a certain hidden corner of Zone RL 1558, a team of about 400 to 500 people, each wearing a black suit, quietly gathered here. The leader was none other than Captain Steve Gus. What was surprising was that his arm that should have been broken has now recovered completely. Behind him was Mekko from the Kubenrai world. It is said that the two are already boyfriend and girlfriend. Looking up to high altitude, 20 flying warships stood ready. Air Force Admiral Kizaru Borsellino and Air Force Admiral Azure Dragon Kaido each stood on the deck of a warship. Marco and King were also silently waiting behind them. Big Mom Charlotte Linlin was stepping on her Prometheus and swaying back and forth, looking here, looking there, like a girl waiting for a good show to start. Below, in front of the trench directly facing the Stargate camp, Army General Akainu Sakazuki, Marine Admiral the Fist Garp, and Whitebeard Newgate stood in the first row. Army Admiral Candidate Ghost Shark Bullet, Army Admiral Candidate Sand Crocodile, Navy Admiral Candidate Tokiji Q's, and others lined up in the second row. Further back, one could see dozens of powerhouses mixed with former Marine Vice Admirals, former Whitebeard pirates, and former Big Mom pirates, such as Army Lieutenant General Shiryu of the Rain, Army Lieutenant General Charlotte Oven, and Army Lieutenant General Onigamo. And below the red line, Marine warships also docked on the sea on both sides, constantly monitoring the situation above. Truly the focus of all eyes, truly the whole army preparing for war. Above the moon, Im stood above Noah's Ark, looking at the already opened star map and star fate. He coldly looked at the small stargate that was only 3 meters high, and finally just let out a light snort, but didn't say a word. Since the decision to wage war has been made, anything more said would be nonsense. The next moment, as his mind moved, he chose to upgrade the stargate without hesitation. In an instant, the small stargate in our L1558 area bloomed with bright starlight that was extremely dazzling even during the day. Today it's not very convenient to explicitly state which world it is here, so I'll just say it directly. The third world is Attack on Titan. To the readers who were urging, you won. Although I still don't know what you were rushing for. Chapter 439, 9 Titans Unite Plan. The deep blue night curtain was dotted with stars. Here lay the most breathtaking starry sky and Milky Way, with silvery sand forming snowdrift-like sand layers and sand dunes on the ground. It was so vast, beautiful, and tranquil here. In the distance, a dazzling, white pillar of light, formed by converging bands of light and resembling a world tree, stood on the snowy ground, pointing directly towards the deep, brilliant cosmic star sea. If you looked up at the high altitude, you could occasionally see a meteor shower streaking past. This was the boundary between the soul realm and the material realm, the interlayer space between the two. Even the river of time seemed to be stagnant in this space. At this moment, a young man and a girl stood facing each other on the snow-white sand. The girl had tea-colored hair and wore a pure white headscarf resembling a headband. She was dressed in a white-based, short-sleeved cotton and linen outfit covered in dust and stains. Her skin was fair, but she was so thin it seemed like she had suffered from long-term nutrition deficiency. Her large eyes revealed clear displeasure, confusion, and stubbornness. Ren, you were too impatient. Originally, even if we hadn't sealed that stargate, the world government on the other side wouldn't have dared to send people in easily again. We could have delayed for much longer. I know, Mir. The young man, dressed in black shoes, black pants, a white shirt, and a black jacket, with black hair and black eyes, gazed at the girl's face with his calm gaze. But you also know that sooner or later they would expand the stargate and send in a large army. And now, we can strike into their world. Since defeat is inevitable sooner or later, why not bring the war to their world? Consider it the last bit of anger unleashed before our world is subjected to slavery. This young man was Ran Yeager, who was already 22 years old this year. 7 years ago, in early Paradise Island year 850, which was not long after he and Mikaza graduated from the training corps, he first saw a vision of the doomsday of the future in a dream on a pitch-black night. Golden beams spread across the sky. When they hit the ground, they would expand into huge crimson fireballs, followed closely by mountain-sized magma masses falling from the sky, eventually turning into lava waves that swallowed the human, giant, and cannon on the ground. Blue-scaled dragons flying in the dark clouds, their mouths spewing pillars of fire that split prosperous cities in two. Hundreds of meters tall black giants swept through the airship battalions in the sky. Although, at that time, he had no idea what an airship was. Finally, he saw places he was familiar with overrun by large numbers of gun-wielding soldiers wearing black uniforms. People he was familiar with, including his partners Mikaza and Armin, and the citizens, were captured in groups. They seemed to be mining. Originally, he just thought this was merely a somewhat fantastical nightmare. But the first time he transformed into the Attack Titan, he was pulled into this space called the Paths, and he first learned of the existence of the founder Mir. At that time, Mir told him everything. She told him the truth that otherworld armies would invade this world 7 years later, and told him that he had to find a way to deal with it within these 7 years. But what could he, at 15 years old, do? Unexpectedly, his future self kept providing him with various screen feeds and information from the future. In a very short time, he saw his entire original copy of life. Just like that, he knew what he had to do. First, gather the strength of the 9 Titan shifters into one body, becoming the strongest ultimate giant in history. Second, he must unite all the strength that could be united, not just Paradise Island, but also those detestable, disgusting Marlians, and even countries from the whole world. Thus, with the help of his future self and the founder Yair, he proceeded cautiously and steadily, slowly growing along the original copy of Fate while secretly devising his operation plan. In this process, he successively devoured the successor of the female Titan, Annie Lenhart, who was an undercover agent England, the successor of the armored Titan, Rainer Braun, and the successor of the Jaw Titan, Mir. However, during the battle to retake Wall Maria, Fate played a cruel joke on him. Although the successor of the colossal Titan, Bertolt Hoover, was successfully defeated, Armin suffered severe injuries due to high-temperature steam and was critically ill. Just as Captain Levi wanted to use the only spinal fluid injector to turn Armin into a pure Titan, and then have him meet Bertolt Hoover to gain the strength of the colossal Titan and recover from his injuries. He, at that time, had to painfully intervene and stop it. Without a word, he took the first step and swallowed Bertolt Hoover under everyone's angry gaze. Because if Armin became the colossal Titan, then if he wanted to gather the strength of the 9 giants, he would have to eat Armin himself. Rather than that, it was better to let Armin leave this living hell, which was destined to be subjected to slavery, as a human. Immediately after, he told his trusted partners like Mikasa and Captain Levi about the matters that were about to happen in the future. At first, they naturally found it hard to believe. But fortunately, the Founder Titan's ability was quite convenient. He transmitted the screen feeds into the minds of other partners with Eldian bloodline, and then had them describe it to Mikasa and Captain Levi. From then on, their small group had a unified target. After all, no one wanted to be subjected to slavery, especially by people from another world. 2 years later, that is, in Paradis Island year 852, they launched the rebellion operation against the central inland area ahead of schedule. Under the strength of the 6 Titans united, the entire process occurred without accident, and they successfully placed Crystal Lens, whose real name was Historia Rice, on the throne as the queen of the new Eldian Empire. Because she was the only remaining direct descendant of King Fritz, the so-called royalty of the Eldians. Subsequently, they began to actively contact the former allies of the Eldians, the Hizuru kingdom located in the Oriental Island nation, which was the hometown and motherland of Mikasa, Captain Levi, and others from the Ackerman clan. 1 year later, that is, in Paradis Island year 853, Ren came alone to Marley across the island, secretly contacting the true controller of this country, the current head of the Tiber family, Willie. To be honest, this was another very difficult choice for him. Because the suffering on Paradis Island over the past few centuries could arguably be attributed entirely to Marley constantly sending pure Titans inland, and the Tiber family was the main culprit who made them live in hell. But Ren had no choice. If he wanted to unite the strength of the entire world, he had to leverage Marley's unparalleled international influence. So, first, he had to persuade Willie Tiber and make him believe everything that would happen in the future. Fortunately, the Tiber family were also Eldians and could receive the memory screen feeds transmitted by the Founder Titan. Of course, this was also the sad part. Who would have thought that the ones who made the Eldians inland struggle in a sea of blood for hundreds of years were actually the Eldians outside the island? Even more fortunately, this head of the Tiber family, Willie, was quite rational, calm, and could even be described as having wisdom. He had a great overall situation perspective. After believing Ren, he immediately began to take action. First, disregarding much domestic criticism, he recognized the legitimacy of the new Eldian Empire. Then, he invited the higher-ups from hundreds of strong and wealthy countries around the world, including the Middle East United Nations, and publicly revealed the future information. Then, using the reputation the Tiber family had accumulated over centuries, his personal charisma, and Marley's powerful influence, he promoted the establishment of the World Alliance Army. But just at this moment, Ren proposed the 9 Titans Unite plan that he had been planning for a long time. However, to complete this plan, he had to eat the remaining 3 Titan successors as well. Namely, Pike of the Cart Titan, Zeke Yeager of the Beast Titan, and Willie Tiber's sister, Lara Tiber of the Warhammer Titan. Chapter 440, Lies, Resentment, and Giant. Mir, I want to confirm again, are you sure the world government will ultimately only enslave us, and not massacre our world? Ren stared blankly at the girl's pale and delicate face. Yes, after you died. Although they massacred the World Alliance army and killed the governments of most country, they didn't massacre too many civilian. The Eldians also lived well, just like me, they were only enslaved. Receiving this reassuring answer, Ren gave a bitter shake head and said, "What about Mikasa? How is she?" Although he could see the future memory transmitted back by his future self, he couldn't see the future after his future self died. Therefore, this future needed Mir to tell him. Ren's knowing the past is a standard ability for Titan Shifter, which allows them to see the past memory of previous successor. Future Sight, on the other hand, is a special ability from the Attack Titan, which allows the user to see the future memory of future successor. The memory transmission ability comes from the Founder Titan's absolute control over all giant. But all of this is managed by Founder Ymir in the coordinate space. She is essentially the central system of the power of the Titans. Here, we need to talk about what exactly Ren's future sight is. Simply put, it's like an infinite simulator. Through the large number of future memory transmitted back by his future selves, he can constantly deduce and observe what is about to happen in the world at this moment, and the result is 100% certain to occur. If he makes a change during this process and fate shifts, then a future self from a newly generated parallel world will continue to provide the latest future memory, and that result will also be certain to occur. That's why it's said that as long as there are future selves and Ymir providing help, this is a strong future sight similar to a simulator. This is how he was able to accurately determine the movement path of Sipperpal through the high-definition screen feed and arrange landmine in advance to kill them. This is how he was able to seize numerous key timing points when Burndie World rushed out of the Stargate at high speed, dropping himself from the biplane bomber, Italian Caproni Ca.30 bomber, and then detonating the colossal Titan's transformation power the moment the former looked up. Because these were all successful experience gained after many attempts by numerous future selves. As for the fate of those failed future selves, it is unknown. For the current Ren, they are merely possible future that have been destroyed. The most important thing is the time point and world line he is currently in. Through such an outrageous simulation cheat, with Ymir's help, Ren had seen thousands of future vision with slight differences in this coordinate space. But there was not a single one where they successfully defeated the world government, not even one where they successfully prevented their invasion. The hardening crystal, which was so hard that only the Jaw Titan could bite through it, was also shattered by the opponent using some unknown means. One can imagine how despair he felt at that time. Finally, Ren had actually asked Ymir if they surrendered, if they submitted, whether they could be treated kindly by the world government. But the latter's answer was no. Ymir told him that the world government's conduct in the future would be very haughty and ruthless. To collect various resources from their own world, they would enslave everyone in the whole world as laborers. Even inland, on the island, on Paradis Island, because ice-burst stone was needed, all Eldians would be forced to mine desperately, and the child who awakened as Titan Shifter would be captured and taken to the opponent's world, their whereabouts unknown. From then on, Ren completely gave up on the world government. This ignited the anger in his heart and his desire for freedom. Since they were destined to be defeated and enslaved, why not go all out and deliver a heavy punch first? Otherwise, there might not be another timing. Mikasa, after you died, she committed suicide under that tree. Ymir said lightly after a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Is that so? That's good then. Ren felt that at least Mikasa wouldn't have to endure the pain of slavery. He then let out a long sigh. He now had less than a year of life left. But he didn't actually care about that. What he regretted more was not being able to see the memory of the future Attack Titan successor. This indicated two possibilities. 1, there would be no more Attack Titan after him, and perhaps not even other Titan Shifter. Were the Eldians massacred by the world government? 2, they might have been taken to another world, so his ability couldn't see them. He sincerely hoped this was the case. Time is almost up. I must go back. This should be the last time I see you, Ymir. Ren looked into the girl's eyes and said softly. I'm sorry, it seems I can't help you break free from here. It's okay, I'm used to it anyway. Ymir clenched her hands, pursing her thin lips, and whispered. But I still want to fight alongside you once, for freedom. Yes, for freedom. Ren turned and walked forward, his body gradually fading, heading towards the land that was destined to be enslaved, to fight a combat that was destined to be lost. But just 3 seconds after he left the coordinate space, Ymir looked up at the starry sky, at the towering pillar of light, and sighed. I'm sorry, I lied to you. She was unwilling. According to the original copy of Fate, she should have been freed long ago, but the appearance of the world government completely destroyed everything. She would have to continue working here for who knows how many more years. Whether it's the world government or the whole world, everyone must pay the price for the freedom I lost. A voice filled with resentment seemed to turn into ominous darkness, adding a few shadows to the pure white sand on the ground. Wah! On the Sea Star mainland, on Punk Hazard where the Academy of Science headquarters is located, a scream loud enough to penetrate all wall and ceilings rang out. Stargate. Is that the Stargate? It's so big. A blue-haired boy with a round red nose stared dumbfounded at the dazzling starlight blooming on the virtual screen, waving his hands and shouting non-stop. Ikema, sitting beside him, looked helpless. He pulled the other's arm and urged. All right, can you quiet down first, Buggy? Ikema, when you came, did you also pass through that big Stargate? Buggy finally sat down, but immediately widened his curious eyes and leaned close to Ikema's face, asking urgently. The latter could only push away his large face with his palm, then shake head and reply. No, I remember the Stargate was only about 3 meters high before, and... Suddenly, the usually calm Ikuma couldn't help but grab his collar and roar. Didn't you just see it grow bigger with your own eyes? Idiot Buggy. After shouting, he let go of the other person with a look of relief, then covered his face in despair, sighing in his heart. Ever since he became friends with this little bastard, Hazumi said his personality had changed a bit. Wow. What are those things? Are those giant tribe too? Ikuma, what are you doing? Hurry up and look, look. They're too tall. They look like they're as tall as 3 giant. Buggy's eyes were almost popping out as he looked incredulously at the screen feed on the virtual screen. Huh? Ikuma looked up in confusion. The next moment, he instantly turned to stone on the spot. It wasn't just him, countless C-Star person watching the live broadcast were also dumbfounded. Beyond the giant Stargate, rows upon rows of supergiant, clad in black iron armor and shrouded in white smoke, stood tall on the dry loess. Chapter 441, The Despairing Rumbling? The massive virtual widescreen projected by the visual Den Den machine not only illuminated the large and small kingdoms and islands within the C-Star world. It also bloomed in the centers of the major iron fortresses within Hinamoto in the Kabaneri world and the major cities in various countries in the Demon Slayer world, attracting tens of millions, even hundreds of millions, of people to gather and watch. Dense crowds of people from different worlds, with faces of all colors, young and old, all stared dumbfounded at the same live broadcast screen feed. The scene was magnificent, vast, and unparalleled. All 3 worlds were watching the Super Stargate, standing on the red line, which was a full 300 meters high and 200 meters wide. What kind of concept is this? It's roughly the height of the Eiffel Tower and the width of 2 soccer fields. As the entrance and exit for a war between 2 worlds, it's barely sufficient. However, compared to the Stargate itself, the colossal titans behind the gate, covered from head to toe in rough iron armored, standing shoulder to shoulder, tightly packed together amidst thick steam-white smoke, were even more shocking, even terrifying. Not only because of their height, but also because of their dense numbers. From a high-altitude viewpoint, one could clearly see the sea of giants that stretched as far as the eye could see. They're moving. They're moving. The first scream came from Buggy's mouth, followed by more screams and panicked cries of terror rising and falling across the 3 realms, especially from the people of the C-Star mainland. The screen feed captured by Morgans from high altitude was simply too shocking. Just watching it through the screen, one could feel a ferocious killing intent rushing towards them. Thump, 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 the first row of armored colossal titans, pressed against the edge of the Stargate, stepped onto the Crimson Land. Each thunderous footstep was like stepping on everyone's heart. The rumbling began to surge in a mighty tide into the RL 1558 area of the Red Line. All-out war officially began. It was also the first time the world government was counter-invaded by another world. Inside the room of authority, the 5 elders sat on the sofa, their expressions cold, revealing extremely obvious killing intent in their eyes. Inside the headquarters of the Other World Strategy Committee, Fernandez, Kong Ming, and the other chairman and vice chairman also had extremely grim expressions. As the frontline department of the world government's contact with other worlds, this was essentially their dereliction of duty. However, the greatest pressure naturally fell on the army, who were bearing the brunt, as the Red Line was the territory the army was responsible for. So it really is the rumbling. If that's the case, then it's fine. On the moon, Im also saw the scene behind the iron-armored giants through Morgan's high-altitude viewpoint. He noticed that apart from the first 10 rows of colossal titans having iron-armored, the colossal titans behind them were all bare muscle, covered in steam. Now it was finally confirmed. They were the wall titans from Paradise Island. Clearly, even with the resources of the entire giant world, it was difficult to cover the rumbling with a layer of iron-armored. After all, the scale of the rumbling was in the tens of millions. What is the concept of tens of millions of 60-meter-tall colossal titans? Just imagine. This is an extremely terrifying scene. Destroying the world is not difficult at all. And for the world government, the most troublesome aspect of the rumbling is their numbers. On the other side of the Stargate, Ren, hidden far behind the front lines, watched the massive Stargate, which seemed to connect heaven and earth, with piercing gaze. At this moment, behind him was Mikasa. Standing beside him were Willie, the head of the Tiber family, Army Marshal Colvey, the Minister of Defense of Marley, Army Admiral Theo Magoth, and Admiral Sargent. There were also Army Marshal Montenegro, Army Admiral Manfred, and Admiral McKen from the Middle East United Nations, as well as Erwin Smith, who was already the Minister of Defense of the Eldian Empire, and Levi Ackerman, the commander of the Survey Corps. In addition, There were representatives from several other strong countries, each an admiral or vice admiral of their respective country, totaling 20 to 30 people. As for the countries lacking strength, they could only follow orders. The plan succeeded. The rumbling has started entering.